These downpours, but they'll move through fairly quickly on a breeze from the west, interspersed by sunny spells. And it's a bit warmer on Wednesday, 22 or 23 Celsius possible in some of the warmer spots. Wednesday evening brings further showers for many, especially towards the north and the west. But increasingly through Thursday and Friday, the showers will be confined to the northwest. And we're going to see plenty of sunshine elsewhere. And what we'll also notice is a sharp upturn in temperatures, 30 Celsius or more in the southeast later.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
Congratulations to GB News Breakfast, voted by you as the nation's best multi-channel news programme at the prestigious Trick Awards.
Marking the Prime Minister's homework, 6 months since Rishi Sunak set out the government's 5 pledges. How has he scored? Well, a powerful committee of MPs to question him shortly, but the latest poll within the Tory party gives him a negative rating for the first time in number 10.
Has an ailing NHS made us sicker? A former health secretary thinks so. Writing in The Times, Sajid Javid says the healthcare service is frozen in time. We're joined by another former health secretary, Stephen Dorrell. So does he agree?
Could judges slam the brakes on London's ULEZ scheme? A judicial review into the anti-pollution ban underway in the High Court. We'll have the latest live from outside the court.
And some breaking news to bring you. Jamie Barrow, who is 31 years old, has been found guilty at Nottingham Crown Court of the murders of Fatoumata Haidara and her young daughters Naima Drameh and Fatima Drameh. They died in a flat fire in Clifton in Nottingham last November.
Let's get an update on all the other headlines now with Aaron.
Very good afternoon to you. It is 12:minutes. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. Several bits of breaking news to begin with. Thames Water's been fined £3.3 million after pleading guilty to 4 charges. It relates to polluting rivers near Gatwick in 2017. It was part of an Environment Agency prosecution at Lewis Crown Court. More details on that as soon as we get it. Meanwhile, more breaking news. 31-year-old Jamie Barrow, as you've just been hearing, has been found guilty of the murders of Fatoumata Haidara and her young daughters. They died in a flat fire in Clifton in Nottingham in 2022. More on that story a little later. And at least 10 people have been injured following reports of a car ramming and stabbing attack by Palestinians in the Israeli city of Tel Aviv. The suspected attack comes as Israeli forces continue their military operation in the occupied West Bank. That has left 10 people dead and dozens more wounded. Thousands of Palestinians have been forced to leave the Jenin refugee camp as a result of the fierce fighting. The World Health Organization says first responders have not been able to enter the camp to help treat those injured. The average rate for a 5-year fixed mortgage deal has now moved above 6%. The Financial Information Service Moneyfacts says the average 2-year fix has also gone up to 6.47%. It comes as the UK's 4 major banks have been summoned to a meeting with the financial watchdog over allegations of profiteering. The FCA will question bosses of NatWest, Lloyds, Barclays and HSBC over concerns that savings rates are lagging behind the soaring costs of mortgages. The average easy access savings rate is 2.45%. Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Pat McFadden, says many families are struggling to make the payments.
It's very concerning, and it's like rolling financial thunder, this. The rates are going up and up, particularly over the past month or so. And every month, there's about 200,000 more people coming off a 2 or a 5-year fixed rate. It might have been fixed in the past at something like 2%. And they're now coming on to the kind of rates that you've just quoted. It's going to cost families hundreds of pounds a month when they renew these deals.
Energy companies are facing financial penalties if they prioritise investors over customers. Ofgem says suppliers should focus instead on maintaining financial resilience rather than paying shareholders dividends. It says it will take action if pricing rules are abused. Wholesale prices have begun to ease and domestic companies are expected to return to profit after 5 years of losses. However, the former boss of Energy UK, Angela Knight, says it's not just the supplier's fault.
I think regulators generally, though, have been a little bit asleep at the wheel, whether it's water, whether it's energy. And I think that financial regulation is these days extremely complicated. And what they can do on the one hand, which is say to banks, you've got to hold more capital, on the other, makes it harder for them to put up the savings rates. But regulators do have a part to play. And I don't think that they have stood in properly over not just this last year, but over several years.
Teaching unions are calling on the government to release the pay recommendations made by an independent body. NEU members in England will stage fresh strikes on Wednesday and Friday this week over the ongoing dispute. All 4 education unions rejected the government's latest offer of £1,000 plus a 4.5% pay rise. In May, the Sunday Times reported the review body recommended a 6.5% pay rise for teachers. However, the government is yet to formally publish those recommendations. Energy companies facing penalties if they prioritise investors over customers. That's a story we have brought you already, so we move on swiftly and carry on with the news. A helpline's been launched for homeless veterans in England, Scotland and Wales. The government-funded initiative aims to connect ex-servicemen and women with housing providers, charities and local authorities. Over £8.5 million has been invested into the service and the website in an effort to end veterans sleeping rough. Meta, the company that owns Facebook, is launching a new app to rival Twitter. Threads, which will be linked to Instagram, is described as a text-based conversation app. However, it appears to very closely resemble its main competitor. It is the latest chapter in the rivalry between the Facebook boss Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, who bought Twitter in October. Twitter recently announced unverified users, those who don't pay, will be limited to reading 600 posts per day. And British sports heroes have joined together to celebrate the 75th birthday of the NHS. Sir Andy Murray, who's on court at Wimbledon later, Johnny Peacock and Sam Quek are a few of the athletes who shared personal stories about how the NHS has supported them. More as it happens, as always, here on GB News. Now it is back to Mark and Pip.
Aaron, thank you very much indeed. Some more on that breaking news coming in from Nottingham Crown Court, where a man's been found guilty of murder after admitting killing a young family in a flat fire last year.
Jamie Barrow, who's 31, from Clifton in Nottingham, confessed to police after burning down his neighbour's home with a mother and her 2 young children inside after a night of heavy drinking last November.
Well, our East Midlands reporter Will Hollis has the latest from Nottingham Crown Court.
3 lives tragically cut short. Fatoumata Haidara and her 2 children, Fatima and Neymar Drama, aged just 3 and 1, died after breathing in smoke in a place they should have been safe, their home. All 3 lives lost because their flat on Fairhow Close was deliberately set on fire. The man responsible, their killer, was their neighbour. Today, 31-year-old Jamie Barrow, who lives on the same street in Clifton, Nottingham, was found guilty of all 3 of their murders. He'd already admitted manslaughter. CCTV footage from the 19th of November last year shows Barrow buying cans of beer. Soon after, he returned to buy more. In the early hours of the next morning, he set fire to the young family's flat by pouring petrol from his motorbike through the letterbox and lighting it with tissue paper. He was caught on CCTV walking away, despite neighbours hearing screams. By the time the police had arrived, Barrow had returned with his dog to watch the fire take hold.
Has she already grabbed your details?
He was caught smiling on a police body cam. Later, he called police asking for updates.
Nottingham Police, Sally speaking, how can I help?
Hello, my name's Jamie. I live on Fairhow Close at number 19, next to where the fire was earlier this morning.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if there's any update on whether I'm allowed back into my property or not.
Officers arrested Barrow at his home the following afternoon when he confessed. He claimed he thought the flat was empty, despite a light being on inside and a pushchair at the door. During the trial, the jury was told that Barrow had complained to the council about rubbish left in an alleyway, but prosecutors said it was not accepted that Haidara was to blame. Barrow, who has emotionally unstable personality disorder, had stopped taking medication a few months before. He told the court that he sets fires to relax. The killings rocked the quiet Clifton street and robbed a young family of a promising future. Fatoumata, a former voluntary worker from Gambia, and her children were just weeks away from starting a new life in America with their husband and father, Abu Bakar. He said he will deeply miss his family. Barrow will be sentenced at Nottingham Crown Court in the near future. Will Hollis, GB News in Nottingham.
Let's bring you some more breaking news coming in from Tel Aviv, where there's been a so-called ramming attack with a car and also an associated stabbing. Now, the latest we're getting, these pictures just coming in, is that Hamas, the militant group, Palestinian militant group, has called it a heroic attack in Tel Aviv. Part of what it saw as the natural response to the ongoing massacre of our people. Of course, this relates to these incidents in Jenin on the West Bank. The latest is at least one victim in serious condition.
There is also a 46-year-old woman with multiple systemic injuries, 3 other people injured. The attacker is thought to have been neutralised, which we suspect means shot and killed at the scene. But Hamas does appear to be claiming responsibility. And all this comes as thousands of Palestinians leave the Jenin refugee camp in the West Bank. That's following the military operation by Israeli Defence Forces that they say is close to completing. But Palestinian officials say their operation killed 10 Palestinians, 100 others wounded. And now, in the last few moments, we've had that statement from the Palestinian militant group Hamas that this attack this morning in Tel Aviv is part of a natural response to the ongoing massacre of our people.
Well, you can see the Israeli Defence Force here deployed after this incident in Tel Aviv. The latest from Israeli Army radio saying that a civilian first responder actually, using this term, neutralised the alleged attacker, shot and killed at the scene, they say, and indications that investigations, you can see, still continuing. That area now taped off, roped off as investigations continue. But as we were saying, still ongoing too in Jenin in the West Bank. So we'll update you as we get more on that from the Middle East. Now, it's been 6 months since Rishi Sunak announced his 5 priorities for government, but it doesn't seem to be going very well so far. A new survey, indeed, within his own party, giving the Prime Minister a negative approval rating for the first time since he entered number 10.
After a rocky week with a major setback in getting flights to Rwanda off the ground and suffering defeats in the Lords over his flagship illegal migration bill, he'll be grilled by the powerful Commons Liaison Committee later today over the cost of living, the state of our public services and security matters. So quite a lot there to be quizzed about.
Indeed. Let's get the latest from Westminster and speak to our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood. And Tom, clearly at the moment, the, marking is sort of on a minus basis in terms of his own supporters. And, of course, we've got this liaison committee as well, the heads of all the various select committees.
Absolutely. The Liaison Committee is a 6-monthly occurrence for the Prime Minister. He's only done it once before, back last December. So this is the first time he'll be in front of various heads of committees, crucially with those 5 pledges that he announced at the start of the year 6 months ago. He will no doubt be asked about those 5 pledges. And crucially, in the Liaison Committee, unlike in Prime Minister's questions, there's a back and forth. He'll be sitting down in a committee room and there will be a back and forth between those heads of committees and the Prime Minister. And so he won't be able to wriggle out of questions in the way that Prime Ministers often do at Prime Minister's questions with a simple question and answer format. This is much more detailed, much more lengthy questioning that will take place from 2 p.m.
Let's ask you too, Tom, about this new survey from Conservative Home, where the Prime Minister's approval rating has sunk very, very low. I mean, in June, it was 21.6. Now, it is minus 2.7.
This is very significant. The Conservative Home survey, whilst not an accredited member of the British Polling Council, has been eerily accurate in the past in terms of gauging the popularity of Conservative ministers, crucially within the Conservative Party. These are Conservative activists, Conservative members who take this monthly survey from the Conservative Home website. And crucially, if the Prime Minister dips down into the minus level there seem to not be doing well amongst their own supporters, and that's very significant. Of course, Rishi Sunak was never elected by Conservative Party members. He was elected just by MPs, with a contest being avoided back in October last year, and so perhaps there's always been that distance between him and the membership. But also in this survey, we see now that 7 Conservative cabinet ministers are in the minus rankings. That's more than have ever been recorded by Conservative Home. And it's interesting too, looking at those at the top of the leadership table there, those that are most favoured by the Conservative membership. It used to be, once upon a time, Liz Truss who would always hold that top spot, perhaps a clue to her winning the Conservative leadership contest last summer. Of course, she's no longer included in these rankings as she's no longer in the cabinet, but the top spot goes to Ben Wallace, the Defence Secretary, and the next 3 go to James Cleverly, Kemi Badenoch and Penny Mordaunt. Now, those are names that are being swirled around so very often in terms of looking to a future leadership contest.
And it's interesting as well, Tom, that Paul Goodman, the editor of the Conservative Home website, saying that it's reflecting a growing concern at the economic situation, and therefore that they're looking at what they call the blue wall, I guess, rather than the red wall, i.e. the interest rates, the cost of living, and those areas that they could rely on previously, perhaps they can't anymore.
Absolutely. Rishi Sunak was in many ways installed as Conservative Party leader in terms of trying to shore up that blue wall, a shift perhaps from the red wall to the blue wall strategy, trying to hold on to seats that have always been Conservative and felt like they were sort of slipping away in a series of by-elections where particularly the Liberal Democrats were doing really rather well. But it does boil back to that fundamental question raised by Bill Clinton's campaign manager back in 1992. When it comes to elections, it's the economy, stupid. And perhaps that is what will be the leading factor, this sense of this malaise, this cost of living crisis that we're not escaping terribly soon. It perhaps feeds into 3 of Rishi Sunak's 5 pledges he made back in January. The pledge to halve inflation, the pledge to reduce debt, and indeed the pledge to grow the economy. 3 pledges that are all teetering on the brink. The inflation levels staying stubbornly at 8.7%, not getting down to that path, that glide path it needs to halve by the end of the year. Similarly, debt going above 100% of GDP for the first time since the 1960s in this country, heading in the wrong direction when compared to our debt to GDP ratio. But also, crucially, on that matter of growth, the country, yes, has avoided a recession this year, unlike, for example, the Eurozone, but it is still anemic, far lower than, for example, in the United States.
Tom, thank you very much indeed for that from Westminster.
Well, joining us now is political commentator Benedict Spence. Good afternoon to you, Benedict. Thank you for joining us on GB News. What do you make then of these latest approval ratings from Rishi Sunak? I mean, they've dropped significantly just within the space of a month.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's unfortunate because I think he's made a bit of a rod for his own back. He's set himself some very ambitious targets, which one would hope from your Prime Minister, and one would definitely hope for a Prime Minister to have inherited such the mess that he did. But I just don't think that he ever really had the time. And the important thing to remember is that a lot of these things are actually outside of his control. I mean, Tom Harwood there mentioned those 3 key things, I think, which, inflation, economic growth and debt. Well, as Tom said, the debt is sort of slowly creeping up. The growth isn't really happening. It's not happened for the best part of a decade. It's been very sluggish in this country, but people are certainly feeling that when you consider things like inflation. And inflation, it is dropping, but it's just not dropping anywhere near fast enough. And it remains to be seen whether or not it can happen. One of the main drivers of inflation right now is something that is beyond Rishi Sunak's control. That is the price of food, and that is a result of fertilizer shortages, and that is as a direct result of the war in Ukraine. There's not very much that he can do about that, but he said that he would do this. People are feeling poorer, so naturally they are going to be less enthused about the prospect of Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister. And as I say, I just don't think that he has the time to do it. He has a majority in which he can get things like legislation done, but the party itself still appears very divided, even if slightly less pugnacious than it was 6 months ago. So just broadly speaking, it seems to be very stolid, not a lot of progress being made, and a lot of sniping and backstabbing going on at the heart of government. And I think that, as much as anything, explains the low polling ratings for other members of the cabinet. People don't trust that this is a government working in the same direction, I think.
Well, indeed, we've been concentrating on Rishi Sunak, but a record 9 cabinet ministers in negative territory, including Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, Michael Gove, the Levelling Up Secretary, Therese Coffey, the Environment Secretary. So is it the fact that the Tory party itself really has given up on the top team?
I think so. I also think, if you look at those sort of specific areas, I think, the average Briton, whilst not being a sort of an Extinction Rebellion enthusiast, is enthusiastic about things like the environment. Well, the current situation around environmentalism isn't great, when you consider that you've got water companies, pouring sewage into the rivers, and you've got an environment secretary who doesn't seem to be on top of that. It's going to make sense that that particular person doesn't have great approval ratings. Michael Gove is one of the most effective government ministers that we've had in the best part of a decade, but he is tainted by many different aspects of things that are very unpopular, be it Brexit, be it lockdown, be it also, the failure of Boris Johnson on 2 separate occasions. He is tarred with that brush as well. Suella Braverman, she has inherited a very difficult remit as the Home Secretary. The Home Secretary of this country exists to act as a human flak jacket for the Prime Minister. She knew that taking the job, but nonetheless, it's been very difficult to get any kind of movement on illegal immigration in this country. The numbers are down in the small boats across the Channel, but that's because we haven't yet reached that sort of key summer period. And given what's been happening in France over the last week, I wonder whether or not we might see a bit of an uptick in people deciding, actually, this isn't for me. Being a migrant in France, it really isn't for me, and perhaps the UK seems a bit of a better option. So, there is no sort of respite on the horizon, unless one of these things massively changes, one of his 5 pledges, the other, of course, being NHS waiting lists. Unless one of these things massively budges, I can't really see anything changing for Rishi Sunak as much as anything else, because he has the time frame that he has, and he's stuck with the ministers that he has. There isn't anyone else that he can really turn to. This is the hand he's been dealt with. He knew that taking the job. But that doesn't alter the fact that things aren't.
Okay. Benedict, we're just going to interrupt you because we're just getting a bit of breaking news coming in from Downing Street. We had been expecting the banks to be called in later this week to call to account to the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority. Downing Street is just saying, actually, they're being called in today, a meeting at 1:30. This is Lloyds, NatWest, HSBC and Barclays to explore, that's the phrase being used, how well they're supporting savers and passing through the interest rates to the savers as well as those borrowings. That's just coming in. The bank's being called to account today.
Yeah, and that's on a day when that 5-year fixed rate for mortgages has gone past 6%.
6.1%.
Exactly.
And climbing.
Do stay with us here on GB News. Coming up, ULEZ expansion challenged at the High Court today. Will the brakes be slammed on the idea? We will be at court with the very latest after this break.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From Midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening. from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the live desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
To GB News Radio.
Welcome back to the live desk. We were telling you yesterday the government was saying, no, Orkney, you're staying with us. However, in the last few minutes, we can tell you that councillors in Orkney have actually voted to explore alternative forms of governance, including that so-called Nordic connection, i.e. looking towards Denmark or Norway. So that vote just coming in.
Yeah, and that Nordic connection, if you know your Scandinavian history, you might, I don't know, but the islands were under Norwegian and Danish control until 1472, when they were given to Scotland as part of a wedding dowry to King James III of Scotland. Councillors voted by 15 votes to 6 against an amendment to block the motion.
Yeah, so basically they said yes, the government said no. We'll be trying to get some views from Orkney to see where they go from here. All that coming up for you shortly. But let's talk now about the Mayor of London facing the High Court over his plans to expand the ULEZ, or ultra-emission zone.
A group of 5 Conservative councils are challenging the expansion amid concerns that the scheme could harm local businesses. Our reporter Theo Chikomba has been speaking to people who'll be affected.
For over 60 years, Fowl Farm has been rescuing and rehoming neglected animals in and around Kent. But at the end of next month, it may cost them £12.50 a day to drive their ambulance if the proposed plans go ahead.
It's a 12-year-old vehicle. It's a vehicle that we use almost every day to transport animals either to the vets for routine operations or for medical emergencies, but we also use it to go and rescue animals from abuse and neglect, where we sometimes have to go and collect numerous animals at one time. We're already struggling financially with the cost of living crisis, with energy increases and general food and vet bills increasing, so it's just another additional cost for us.
From the end of August, the ultra-low emission zone will expand to outer London boroughs. A move Transport for London say will help stop premature deaths of thousands of people. However, the plans to expand the ULEZ zone are being challenged by 5 councils in court.
It's not just about those people that are suffering from it, but it's also about, I guess, even those people that are compliant with their cars. Everybody knows somebody that's affected by it. And Mr. Khan will say, oh, it's only 10% or whatever it is of cars that are not compliant. But when you add up 10% of the huge numbers of vehicles in outer London, that adds up to about 500,000 people. That's a heck of a lot of people that are affected.
You've gone all quiet now, haven't you? Now we're talking to you.
Meanwhile, David's family from Croydon are also concerned about the future. They are exempt from paying the charge until 2027. They currently rely on this van to take their son to the hospital, but a new adapted vehicle with space for 2 wheelchairs will cost them thousands, money which they say they don't have.
Our little boy JJ, if he has a seizure, many times, as any epileptic will know, he has to go to hospital by emergency ambulance. And that problem means that his mum goes with him, but I have to follow on in our vehicle with 2 wheelchairs, mine and JJ's. But after the sunset period, if JJ has a seizure requiring an ambulance, which he does often, I can't afford to keep going to the hospital.
The Mayor of London has said the ULEZ decision has been difficult, but with toxic air damaging the health of millions of Londoners, he says the cost of inaction would be simply a far too high price to pay. Theo Chkomba, GB News.
But it is not just in London. Other clean air schemes with daily charges for non-compliant vehicles have been implemented across the country. Drivers in Bath will see a daily charge of £9. I think we have a graphic to show you. Birmingham's Clean Air Zone will see a daily charge of £8. Bristol's daily cost is £9, and driving in London's inner city will set you back at £12.50.
Just trying to read the small print with my glasses. I think I've got the gist of it. Anyway, let's speak now to motoring journalist Quentin Wilson, who can run us through some more facts and figures. Quentin, I guess the key is what vehicles are non-compliant, and you know, a lot of modern cars coming through the system now will actually meet the emission standards.
They will. I mean, it's pre-2005 petrols and pre-2015 diesels. The problem with this is I fully support ultra-low emission zones in urban areas. I mean, the zone in central London has had a huge benefit, and we've seen nitrous oxide go down and general pollution, and it's been echoed also in cities in France and Germany. So that's great, but I'm troubled by the data in outer London. Are there that many people with non-compliant cars? How much is it going to cost them? Does this affect a lower demographic more than it does those who have newer cars? And at the time when the economy is really crumbling and we have this severe cost of living crisis, it's all about timing. We may have to do this eventually, and we do have to do something to stop the 40,000 premature deaths from respiratory illnesses from pollution, but this is not the right time. So I would say it needs to be kind of postponed, and we need to look at this data really, really carefully and see if it does stack up.
Quentin, do you live near a busy road? Your home?
I do. I live near the Bayswater Road here in London.
OK, go on, sorry, carry on.
You can see the pollution in your house, on the walls, in the curtains, and that has been made significantly less with the ULEZ zone in inner London.
Yeah, so on many levels, it is a good idea, and there's a lot of campaigners that are saying now's not the right time. Well, when is the right time? And people are just kicking the can down the road. And there are lots of families that are living next to busy roads, and they are families with maybe asthma and varying other health issues.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. And you walk along something like the Marylebone Road and you can taste the pollution in your mouth. It's that kind of metallic, steely. So look, the concept is laudable, absolutely, 150%. It's the timing now which is wrong. And that's why I'm calling for it to be kind of postponed, re-examined, and to look very, very carefully at the data here. But it is something we need to do.
And, of course, that's exactly the question they're asking in this court hearing at the moment. We'll update people with that. Quentin, for the moment, thanks very much. We'll let you get back to cleaning your curtains. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Quentin. Do stay with us here on the live desk on GB News. Very shortly, we'll be joined by a former health secretary after comments from another former health secretary, Sajid Javid, that an ailing NHS has made us as a country sicker. First, your headlines with Aaron.
Hi there, it's 12:33. I'm Aaron Armstrong in the GB Newsroom. Some breaking news to bring you. Thames Water has been fined £3.3 million after pleading guilty to 4 charges relating to polluting rivers near Gatwick in 2017. The company was found to have discharged millions of litres of undiluted sewage into 2 rivers over the course of 6.5 hours, killing more than 1,400 fish. The judge said she believed Thames Water had shown a deliberate attempt to mislead the Environment Agency over the incident. The company supplies 1 in 4 people in Britain with water. Some more breaking news. A 31-year-old man's been found guilty of the murders of Fatoumata Haidara and her 2 young daughters, who died in a flat fire in Nottingham last year. Jamie Barrow poured petrol through their letterbox. Prosecutors said Barrow, who lived in the neighbouring flat, had a grievance over rubbish being left in an alleyway and watched the fire take hold. He will be sentenced on Friday. At least 7 people have been reported injured following a car ramming and stabbing attack by a Palestinian man in the Israeli city of Tel Aviv. The suspected attack comes as Israeli forces continue their military operation in the occupied West Bank, which has left 10 people dead and dozens more wounded. Thousands of Palestinians have been forced to leave their homes in the Jenin refugee camp. The World Health Organization says aid agencies have been prevented from entering the camps to treat the injured. And the average rate for a 5-year fixed mortgage deal has now moved above 6%. The number of deals on the market's also dropped, driving up costs for homeowners. It comes as the UK's 4 major banks have been summoned to a meeting with the financial watchdog over allegations of profiteering. Bosses of HSBC, NatWest, Lloyds and Barclays will be questioned over concerns that saving rates are lagging way behind the soaring cost of mortgages by some 4%. And more on all of our stories on our website, gbnews.com.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think. Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in their home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
And welcome back to the live desk. Now, Thames Water has sunk into more debt after being fined now £3.3 million for polluting rivers at Gatwick down in Surrey back in 2017.
The utility company is facing collapse after already amassing around £10 billion worth of debt.
And this comes too as the Chief Executive Officer of Ofwat, the regulator, David Black, will be facing a House of Lords Industry and Regulators Committee, no less, this afternoon, all part of its inquiry into the water industry.
It'll look into debt levels within the sector, which hit almost £61 billion last year. Also looking at the increase to customer bills and introducing what's called a single social tariff.
Let's speak now to economist Justin Urquhart-Stewart, who can join us in the studio. Because, Justin, you have been looking, obviously, at the bigger picture in terms of privatisation of these utilities back in 1989, which, unfortunately, both you and I remember well. But I'm just looking at what the judge in this latest case involving Thames Water has said with his £3.3 million fine, saying they'd shown a deliberate attempt to mislead the Environment Agency, which is the overseeing body, by omitting water readings and submitting a report to the regulator denying responsibility, which maybe explains why there's been alleged failures by Ofwat, the regulator, which the laws will look at later.
Yeah, I mean, you look at this entire industry was badly regulated before it was privatised, because you couldn't see what was going on in the first place. Yeah. And it's been even worse regulated post it, because they didn't do anything in terms of actually showing any muscle to say what the standards should be and make sure that actually they are running businesses which were providing the right standard of service and getting more investment in, which they did to start with. Yeah. But then that changed, and you saw these regulators then not paying attention to what was going on. There were short-term investors, particularly from private equity, coming in, taking money out of the business, getting more debt in, allowing them to get bigger dividends without seeing the right elements of regulation.
Is it fair to say that perhaps Ofwat didn't have the expertise to actually acknowledge and see what was going on in terms of what some may allege was pretty creative accounting?
I think that's probably quite right. Mind you, how many people get up in the morning saying, I want to be a water regulator? And what do I need to look at? You have to actually understand not just that industry, but accounting practices and some creative accounting practices. The three letters we're using at the City at the moment, the fashionable ones, environmental, ESG, environmental, sustainable and governance. If businesses can't run like that, you shouldn't invest in them. These water companies fail on every single one of those. So what does the regulator need to do? Put up those letters against what they're seeing with those businesses and see whether they're now behaving in the right sort of way.
The campaigner, Fergal Sharkey, he's been very vocal about wanting an enforcement order for the government to take control of supplies. That's different, isn't it, to nationalisation?
Yeah, it's not.
Is that
it's not
realistic?
really nationalisation would actually achieve a great deal. It's actually just making sure you've actually got investment, right type of investment going in, which is long-term, proper regulation to actually make sure it's actually happening. I mean, back in 1989, the big headlines were, we're replacing Victorian sewers.
Yes.
Well, last year I saw Thames Water doing an advertising campaign, replacing Victorian sewers. That was 30 years ago. Something should have happened in the meantime.
But isn't there a tax advantage for them in terms of investing in their own industry? I mean, there is a tax break available for them.
Yeah, there is. Yes. And it's, and what the government can do if they want to get more long-term investment, it is creating incentives. They don't have to spend any money. They have to create the right environment to get domestic money, longer-term money. For instance, a lot of our pension money would be good to invest in those sort of areas. And you look at some of the investors in these water companies, you'll find quite a lot of Canadian and university pension.
Well, even sovereign funds from abroad.
Absolutely.
Abu Dhabi and China, am I right in saying?
Yes, and we had Singapore, Temasek in for a while. I'm not too sure if they're still there. Quite right, because they see this as good, steady, long-term assets, which it's never you're always going to need it there. But, of course, what the privatisation, what I think most people didn't understand, it was supposed to be creating competition. No, it wasn't. These were local monopolies. And when you've got a monopoly, you have to keep even more of an eye on it to make sure they're behaving properly.
What about the embarrassment factor that, do sovereign funds now want to be associated with all this, bearing in mind, as you say, the environmental considerations they have to show to their own investors?
Absolutely. I mean, if you're saying, I've taken our money from this particular country and I'm investing in these water companies and look what they've been doing for the past few years, and they're now shown to be not being run properly, too right, I'll sell them. One way to actually make sure you actually get proper investment into a company, into a country, confidence. And unfortunately, that's not what we've been doing recently.
Justin, as ever, thank you very much indeed for your expertise and joining us here in the studio. Let's actually move on to, another issue that's bedeviling the people in charge, dare I say, or are they in charge? That's a big question.
Yes, on the eve of its 75th anniversary, one former health secretary has issued a stark warning over the state of our NHS.
Yes, Sajid Javid says that Britons are sicker than those in other Western countries as a consequence of the way the health service was set up, and that both Conservative and Labour MPs now admit that it's in the long term unsustainable.
Let's get the thoughts of another former health secretary, former Conservative health secretary and former Health Select Committee chair, Stephen Dorrell, who joins us in the studio. Thank you for being here. What do you make of his comments then, especially off the back of this big announcement last week about the NHS workforce plan? I mean, it's such a contrast, Sajid Javid's views.
Yeah, I just don't agree with Sajid. I agree with him, actually, that a cross-party agreement about with a medium-term view for the health service would be healthy. I do agree with that. But one of the things that, you know, is a complete constant throughout the history, 75 years of the National Health Service, have been politicians saying that it's broken, that saying it's unaffordable. The first Royal Commission that was set up to prove that was set up in the early 1950s. It's been going on throughout the history of the health service, and to say we're iller just doesn't stack up with the facts. The reality is that British men and women live, on average, 13 years longer than they did the day the health service was established. That's something we ought to celebrate, rather than always saying that this system that served us well, not perfectly, plenty of room for improvement, but served us well for 75 years, is somehow broken.
So you wouldn't share, then, Amanda Pritchard's assessment, Chief Executive of the NHS? We are older, more complex and generally sicker.
Well, yes, that's, of course, that is true.
But it's the demand being made of an existing service.
But the point I'm making is that those older, sicker people are helped into a longer and actually a more fulfilling life by the range of public services. Another thing that's always got wrong about the health service is to imagine that somehow healthy life is something that you can delegate to the National Health Service. There are other public services that make a key contribution to the life experience of those people Amanda was talking about, social care being the obvious example, social housing. There's a range of public services, and too often politics focuses on the health service
as a catch-all,
well, as the thing we protect because we're looking after people, and actually what happens is that demand that should be dealt with in social care and other public services finds its way into the NHS, typically into A&E departments and emergency admission wards, because none of the other services are working properly to meet the demand that they're actually better placed to meet than the NHS.
And just putting you on the spot, can you remember how long waiting lists were when you were Health Secretary? I mean, now they're 7+ million.
Yeah, the answer is that they were shorter. There were fewer people.
How much shorter?
Significantly shorter. But we all had. The health service has always had a problem with waiting times. Actually, the thing that in the end matters most is the time people wait to be seen to have secondary care. And what we need to be doing is, and Sajid's right about this, organising the different bits of the health service better in order to provide people with access to service in a timely way.
What about his point, though, of the politicisation of the NHS and the short-term thinking? And he's reflected that both Labour and Tory MPs think in the long term that what we've got now is unsustainable. And he's got this idea of a Royal Commission, which you mentioned back in the 1950s, to address that particular point. Would that actually find more answers or new answers?
Well, I don't think there are many new answers in this space, you know. If there was some magic bullet that was going to solve all these problems, sometime in the last 75 years, we'd have tripped over it, even if we only did it by accident. These are complex issues, but the thing that is simply wrong is to say that the health service is the same as it was 75 years ago. Just look at the hospitals, look at the doctors' surgeries, look at the treatments that are available, look at the digital technology that supports the treatments. It's just not true to say that it's the same as it was 75 years ago.
One thing Rishi Sunak said last week when he announced the NHS workforce plan was that past governments have avoided the challenges and we are tackling them.
Well, I guess the first thing I'd say around the workforce plan is that at the moment 10% of all the positions in the health service are vacant. And isn't that something to do with the terms and conditions that the health service offers? The health service is needing to recruit people in a competitive labour market. And there is a key issue for the health service to ensure that it is a good employer, a place where people want to work, to which they want to devote their lives.
Stephen Dorrell, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts.
And next time you come in, we'll try and fix your squeaky chair.
Thank you very much. I have to take that as a promise.
It is, because we have the same problem.
Now, let's update you on the latest we're getting from the Far East, from the Near East, Middle East, rather. I'm getting now a figure of 10 people having been injured in this car ramming and stabbing attack in Tel Aviv. That's gone up another 3 in the last few minutes. Hamas calling that a first response, they said, to Israel's large-scale military operation in Jenin on the West Bank, which is launched against militants in a refugee camp there on Monday.
Thousands of Palestinians have since fled the camp, and officials say that 10 Palestinians have been killed, as Mark was just saying, with 100 wounded. The Israeli Defence Forces say they have arrested 120 suspects and that their operation is nearly complete.
Well, I think we can maybe bring you a picture of the latest in Jenin. We've got this shot there of the cityscape, and we can bring in Israeli journalist Yotam Confino to speak to us. Yotam, we saw the smoke over that cityscape yesterday. It appeared calmer, and now we've got this incident in Tel Aviv, which is, I guess, the fear we were discussing yesterday of the thing escalating.
Exactly, and I'm tempted to say as we expected, simply because we've seen a lot of Palestinian terror attacks in response to military operations in the West Bank, so it is not the first time. And this is what we're seeing now. We don't know if the Palestinian who carried out this attack in Tel Aviv, he did it because of what happened in Jenin, simply because he didn't leave any notes specifying his intentions. But the fact that Hamas is now saying this is a direct response to what's happening in Jenin, I think we can assume that that's pretty much true. Now, this is, first of all, very serious because, like you said, 10 people are injured right now. We still don't know if anyone is dead. A lot of people have been taken to the hospital. But it will have an effect on what is happening in the West Bank. If Israel was about to stop the operation, they just got a green light to continue the operation. That's at least the initial assumption of what will happen now. It will look very odd if the military simply concludes their operation in Jenin now, shortly after attack happened in Tel Aviv.
Yotam, we're just getting a bit more coming in from the other group, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, its group leader saying the attack in Tel Aviv, the first response to the resistance to what is happening in Jenin. I mean, I guess they're all going to jump on this and claim some kind of responsibility or link to it for obvious reasons. But I think I'm right in saying we haven't seen anything in Gaza yet. There's been no reaction there as yet.
No, and that's quite interesting. It tells us a couple of things. First of all, we have to remember that Hamas is the ruler of Gaza, and it is the sovereign, so to say, in there. And Hamas is not interested in being dragged into a war with Israel. In fact, it's still licking its wounds from the last conflict with Israel in 2021. Islamic Jihad is more radical, more militant, has less to lose, really, and is more trigger-happy, so to say. So if we were to see any response, it would likely be from Islamic Jihad, but it also seems as if they're trying now to just really watch what's happening before they respond, if they respond, because sometimes we see these lone wolves carrying out these attacks like we see now. There's nothing that indicates that this man was linked to Hamas or Islamic Jihad. We simply don't know that. He could simply just be a lone wolf doing the dirty work for them. So as of now, both Hamas and Islamic Jihad haven't retaliated for what's happening in Jenin.
And in Jenin, several thousand Palestinians have fled their homes. I mean, this is going to continue, isn't it? In light of what's happened today as well. This military operation's not over yet.
It will. First of all, the UN is really criticizing Israel for the destruction it has left in Jenin. It's very, very difficult for ambulances and medical staff to get in and treat people in Jenin. That's one thing. But also, Israel is saying it's not done yet. It hasn't reached its military goals yet. And their goals are to, first of all, hunt down terrorists and to dismantle their infrastructure, which means finding rocket launchers, destroying command centrals, rooms, war rooms, so to say, where they meet and plan attacks. Also to dismantle tunnels where they hide bombs and where they manufacture bombs, something that Prime Minister Netanyahu has referred to as being on an industrial scale. So Israel is not done yet, it looks like.
Well, indeed, on the bigger political picture, where does this leave the Netanyahu government? Is it they can now say, look what's happened in Tel Aviv, we are doing the right thing for the right reasons?
It's exactly the right assumption that you're bringing in here. I think 20 minutes after the attack in Tel Aviv, the finance minister, who belongs to one of the far-right parties in the government, who's also a member of the security cabinet, said, look, this is exactly why we're in Jenin. This is exactly why we're protecting you. That's according to him. And this is why the military operation will continue. Now, he has a seat at the security cabinet. So we will expect the government to use this as an excuse or maybe to justify the military operation in Jenin.
Yeah, and yet they're trying to justify it, but we're hearing that Jenin's main hospital was attacked with tear gas. People trying to provide first aid have been caught up in it, ambulances.
It's always difficult for Israel to justify large-scale operations in civilian areas because, first of all, civilian will be hit. It's simply impossible when you're engaging in what looks like urban warfare. It's impossible not to target civilians. And Israel seems to be reckless, sometimes at least, not always, but sometimes they do. And the destruction that's been left in Jenin, pictures really say a lot, and especially when they're being brought out to all the biggest media in the world. So it's hard for Israel to justify what it is that they're doing. But of course, this attack now serves them some sort of justification for hunting down the terrorists.
OK, Yotam, thank you very much indeed for bringing us your response there in Israel. Just to update you, the number now, we're being told 10 injured in that incident in Tel Aviv, and indications that one woman at least is quite seriously hurt. A 46-year-old woman with multiple systemic injuries is how the authorities have described it. And in terms of the reaction, as we just been discussing, Hamas saying it's a heroic attack. In addition, in the last few minutes, Palestinian Islamic Jihad saying it's the first response of the resistance to what's happening in Jenin.
We will bring you more on this and all the other stories that matter to you at the top of the hour. Do stay with us here on the live desk on GB News.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Sergeant, the big read, my superstar panel, they're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
A 31-year-old man is found guilty of killing a mum and her 2 daughters after setting fire to their home in Nottingham. Jamie Barrow rang a police helpline during the investigation to offer his help before he was then arrested.
Marking the Prime Minister's homework. 6 months since Rishi Sunak set out the government's 5 pledges. How has he scored so far? A powerful committee of MPs will be questioning him shortly as the latest poll within the Tory party gives him a negative approval rating for the first time in number 10.
Could judges slam the brakes on London's ULEZ scheme? A judicial review into the anti-pollution plan underway in the High Court. We'll have the latest live for you.
And as the number of signatures on the GB News petition to save cash nears 50,000, we speak to a pensioner about why she can't rely on cars and mobile phones to pay her way.
Let's get an update now on all the headlines with Aaron.
Good afternoon to you. It is 1 minute past 1 here in the GB newsroom. Thames Water has been fined £3.3 million after pleading guilty to 4 charges relating to polluting rivers near Gatwick in 2017. The company was found to have discharged millions of litres of undiluted sewage into 2 rivers over the course of 6.5 hours, killing more than 1,400 fish. The judge said she believed Thames Water had shown a deliberate attempt to mislead the Environment Agency over the incident. The company supplies 1 in 4 people with water in Britain. The family of a mother and 2 children who were murdered in a flat fire in Nottingham say they're relieved the killer has been brought to justice. It's after a 31-year-old man was found guilty of the murders of Fatoumata Haidara and her 2 young daughters in the flat fire in Clifton last year. Jamie Barrow poured petrol through their letterbox. Prosecutors said Barrow, who'd been living in the neighbouring flat, had a grievance over rubbish left in an alleyway and watched the fire take hold. Now, a developing story from Tel Aviv in Israel. At least 7 people have been reported injured following a car ramming and stabbing attack by a Palestinian man. The suspected attack comes after Israeli forces continued their military operation in the occupied West Bank, which has left 10 people dead and dozens more wounded. Thousands of Palestinians have been forced to leave the Jenin refugee camp, and the World Health Organization says aid agencies have been prevented from entering to treat the injured. Now, back to that incident we brought you at the top of this story. International spokesman for the Israeli police, Dean Nelsoon, has described what happened in Tel Aviv.
I'm right now in Tel Aviv. Behind me is a bus stop where a terror attack took place. Individual rammed his car into civilians in a populated area of Tel Aviv, managing to injure 7 civilians. He got out of his vehicle and began trying to stab the civilians that were around him. Luckily, there was an individual, a civilian, who was armed, and he managed to neutralize this terrorist. Now, the police are here in large forces. We have the police commissioner, Yaakov Shabtai. We have the commander of the Tel Aviv district also here to investigate, to see what's going on, to get a situational assessment of the terror attack that took place right now.
The average rate for a 5-year fixed mortgage deal has now moved above 6% for the first time this year. The number of deals on the market has also dropped, driving up costs for homeowners. It comes as the UK's 4 major banks have been summoned by the financial watchdog. The FCA will question the bosses of HSBC, NatWest, Lloyds and Barclays over concerns that saving rates are lagging behind the soaring cost of mortgages by around 4%. A Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Pat McFadden, says many families are struggling to make the payments.
It's very concerning, and it's like rolling financial thunder, this. The rates are going up and up, particularly over the past month or so. And every month, there's about 200,000 more people coming off a 2 or a 5-year fixed rate. It might have been fixed in the past at something like 2%. And they're now coming on to the kind of rates that you've just quoted. It's going to cost families hundreds of pounds a month when they renew these deals.
Energy companies are facing financial penalties if they prioritise investors over customers. Ofgem says suppliers should focus on maintaining financial resilience rather than paying dividends to shareholders. And action will be taken if pricing rules are abused. It comes as wholesale prices have begun to ease, and domestic energy companies are expected to return to profit after 5 years of losses. But the former boss of Energy UK, Angela Knight, says it's not just the supplier's fault.
I think regulators generally, though, have been a little bit asleep at the wheel, whether it's water, whether it's energy. And I think that financial regulation is these days extremely complicated. And what they can do on the one hand, which is say to banks, you've got to hold more capital, on the other, makes it harder for them to put up the savings rates. But regulators do have a part to play. And I don't think that they have stood in properly over not just this last year, but over several years.
Teachers' unions are calling on the government to release the pay recommendations made by an independent body. Members of the NEU in England are staging fresh strikes this week on Wednesday and Friday over the ongoing pay dispute. All 4 education unions rejected the government's latest offer of £1,000 plus a 4.5% pay rise. Meta, the company that owns Facebook, is launching a new app to rival Twitter. It's called Threads. It will be linked to Instagram, and it's been described as a text-based conversation app. It does appear to closely resemble its main competitor, Twitter. It's the latest chapter in the rivalry between the 2 bosses, Facebook boss Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, who bought Twitter back in October. Twitter recently announced that unverified users, that's those who don't pay, will be limited to reading 600 posts per day, which does seem like enough. This is GB News, more as it happens, but now it is back to Mark and Pip.
Aaron, thank you very much indeed, and welcome back to the live desk. Now, a man has been found guilty of murder after admitting killing a young family in a neighbouring flat fire last year.
Jamie Barrow, who's 31 and from Clifton in Nottingham, confessed to police after burning down his neighbour's home with a mother and her 2 young children inside. He confessed after a night of heavy drinking last November.
Our East Midlands reporter Will Hollis has the story from Nottingham Crown Court.
3 lives tragically cut short. Fatoumata Haidara and her 2 children, Fatima and Neymar Drama, aged just 3 and 1, died after breathing in smoke in a place they should have been safe, their home. All 3 lives lost because their flat on Fairhow Close was deliberately set on fire. The man responsible, their killer, was their neighbour. Today, 31-year-old Jamie Barrow, who lives on the same street in Clifton, Nottingham, was found guilty of all 3 of their murders. He'd already admitted manslaughter. CCTV footage from the 19th of November last year shows Barrow buying cans of beer. Soon after, he returned to buy more. In the early hours of the next morning, he set fire to the young family's flat by pouring petrol from his motorbike through the letterbox and lighting it with tissue paper. He was caught on CCTV walking away, despite neighbours hearing screams. By the time the police had arrived, Barrow had returned with his dog to watch the fire take hold.
Has she already grabbed your details?
He was caught smiling on a police body cam. Later, he called police asking for updates.
Nottingham Police, Sally speaking, how can I help?
Hello, my name's Jamie. I live on Fairhill Close at number 19, next to where the fire was earlier this morning.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if there's any update on whether I'm allowed back into my property or not.
Officers arrested Barrow at his home the following afternoon when he confessed. He claimed he thought the flat was empty, despite a light being on inside and a pushchair at the door. During the trial, the jury was told that Barrow had complained to the council about rubbish left in an alleyway, but prosecutors said it was not accepted that Haidara was to blame. Barrow, who has emotionally unstable personality disorder, had stopped taking medication a few months before. He told the court that he sets fires to relax. The killings rocked the quiet Clifton Street and robbed a young family of a promising future. Fatoumata, a former voluntary worker from Gambia, and her children were just weeks away from starting a new life in America with their husband and father, Abu Bakr. He said he will deeply miss his family. Barrow will be sentenced at Nottingham Crown Court in the near future. Will Hollis, GB News in Nottingham.
Now, it's been 6 months since Rishi Sunak set out his 5 priorities for government, but of course he's struggled to make any progress on the pledges, and it seems it's not gone down well with his own party.
A new survey by the Conservative Home website has given the Prime Minister a negative approval rating for the first time since arriving in number 10.
Let's get more with our political reporter, Catherine Forster, joining us in the studio. And not just him, it seems, Catherine. The whole top team are in negative territory now, according to their own supporters.
Yes, they are. It's not going terribly well at the moment, is it? It seems a long time from the Windsor framework and how it was heralded, and things were starting to turn around and they were feeling a bit optimistic. Things have really changed for the worse. And I mean, it's 6 months today since he stood and made those 5 pledges. At the time, we thought, oh, well, they're fairly, apart from stop the boats, they're not going to be too hard to hit. They're not very ambitious. And the thinking was, from number 10, we'll demonstrate that we can do these, and then we'll announce 5 more that will be bolder and bigger and better. But now it's looking like he's going to struggle to hit any of them, really, this year. So, first of all, inflation. Now, it was about 11% at the beginning of the year. It's currently 8.7. He said he'd halve it by the end of this year. Core inflation, stripping out things like energy, is still rising. Then the economy growing. Well, we may have to have a recession to get inflation under control. The economy did grow by 0.1%, but that's within the margin.
Manufacturing output, again, the latest figures is down.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the marking of the homework is not going well. And, of course, in terms of this website, Conservative Home, they are pointing the party's base really concerned about the economic situation. And we remember him saying at this group of IKEA workers, I'm on it, I've got it.
Yes.
And the trouble is, if you make those promises, you've got to deliver.
Yes, and inflation, for instance, it's not really up to Rishi Sunak, it's up to the Bank of England. But he decided to take ownership of it because he thought it would come down. He thought he'd get the credit for it. Now, it is coming down, but it's much stickier than they thought. To give you another one, reduce the debt. Now, the national debt is now at a record high of 2.6 trillion. It was 2.2 trillion when he came in, so going in completely the wrong direction. And, of course, as a proportion of GDP, it hit 100% last week, so not going well at all.
I think it was 100.1%, wasn't it? Actually slightly more than what we can actually make in terms of the economy.
And that approval rating, it's really dropped like a stone since just June, because June's was 21.6 and the approval rating now minus 2.7.
There seems to have been blow after blow, doesn't there? I mean, last week alone, we had the court not backing the Rwanda deal, so back to the drawing board. They'd hoped to send people to Rwanda by September. That's clearly not going to happen.
It's unlikely to happen maybe even before the next election.
They've put tens of £1 million into this. They've got nothing to show for it.
Yep.
And the economy at the moment does feel like it's going in the wrong direction. And even the NHS, which, of course, we had this long-term workforce plan last Friday, went down very well. But the very immediate problems are not going away because, of course, they're still in the middle of lots of strikes. 5 days of junior doctors, consultants are going to strike. The waiting list that they said they'd cut is now at a record high of 7.4 million. So all of these markers in the immediate term, now, OK, they may not have an election for a year and a half,
well,
but...
I was going to ask you, in terms of the clock ticking, how much time, because they've got this phrase, will go long, i.e. try and push the election as long as possible. What is the cut-off date on that? I mean, how much time do they have to turn things around?
They could go, potentially, to January 2025, but I can't imagine they would, because who wants to go out voting in the depths of winter when the weather is vile, after Christmas, when no one's got any money? But I think it's quite likely. I think it's quite likely that they would go to autumn of next year.
Right.
Some think they'll go in the spring, but it seems like the economy is going to take some turning round, like a massive ship. So I'd be surprised if there was an election before next autumn.
Let's just go back to the graphic we were showing you, just as we continue marking his homework. Where did we get to?
I think we did. Have
we covered it all?
I think we have we not?
Did we get down to small boats? I think we did, actually. So halving inflation, economy... OK, so it's basically...
See me after school.
Cross, cross.
I think the only one currently is, OK, the economy is growing.
Yeah.
Marginally. Of course, they would say the waiting list for sort of 2 years or 18 months have come down substantially.
Which
they have. Ambulance response times have come down substantially, but they need to have a positive offering, don't they?
And in terms of offerings, we had that other phrase, keep your nerve. That may apply now to the Conservative supporters within the rump of the party and Conservative backbenchers. I mean, is there any consideration that they might try and change a leader again before next election, or they've just got to wait and see if he can do something?
That would be barking, wouldn't it?
Given the events of the last year...
How many Prime Ministers have we had in the past?
That is very true.
Given the events of the last year, I probably shouldn't say this, but I think there is no universe in which they would be crazy enough to get rid of Rishi Sunak, simply because...
Not even Penny Mordaunt with a sword of Excalibur being pulled from the stone.
They're on their third in a year.
Yeah,
what would it look like?
I know, but look who frequently tops these ratings. It's Ben Wallace, Defence Secretary. Well, he ruled himself out, didn't he, last year? But he's always very popular with members.
He chose not to run. I'm not sure that popularity would necessarily translate to the wider electorate, but I think they will have to... They've made their bed now with Rishi Sunak, and they will have to lie on it. He is their best and only chance. But there has been a huge outbreak of ill discipline, basically, because things are not going well. So now Tories are popping up all over the place with their better ideas, like the New Conservatives yesterday, and it paints a picture of a fractured party fighting amongst themselves, which is not going to help them.
Catherine, thank you for that. And, of course, we've got the Liaison Committee, the heads of all the select committees, bowling questions at him, and that'd be quite a sticky wicket for him. Just use that cricket analogy where he was looking at what happened at Lawns. Anyway, thank you very much.
Now, the Mayor of London's plan to expand the low-emission zone reaches the High Court today. We will have more on that after your latest weather forecast.
Hi there, Aidan McGibbon here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. Showers once again for many of us today. Prolonged rain for some, especially towards the south, but sunny spells in between a few of the showers. We've got low pressure still in control of our weather. Low pressure sitting to the north of the UK. Another low developing to the south, along with a frontal system likely to push up some heavy and prolonged rain through the course of the day for southern counties, and certainly some lively showers about early afternoon before that prolonged rain sets in across the southwest and then into the south of England, but perhaps affecting South Wales as well later on. Otherwise, for the Midlands, North Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, it's a mix of bright spells and showers. Some of the showers will be heavy, odd rumble of thunder and it's going to feel cool with temperatures generally 17 to 20 Celsius, although somewhere like the East Midlands, East Anglia, before the rain sets in, could reach 21 or 22 Celsius. But it is going to turn wetter across the south and southeast into East Anglia through the evening. That rain slow to clear during the early hours of Wednesday. A gusty wind through the Channel and towards the southeast of England as well. Elsewhere, the showers fading, but still 1 or 2 around for eastern Scotland, northwest England, parts of Wales, and temperatures at around 8 to 12 Celsius as we start off Wednesday. But Wednesday begins once again with showers from the word go, especially for Scotland, Northern Ireland, into central and western parts of the UK. And then those showers, well, fairly widely into the afternoon. A scattering of these downpours, but they'll move through fairly quickly on a breeze from the west, interspersed by sunny spells. And it's a bit warmer on Wednesday, 22 or 23 Celsius possible in some of the warmer spots. Wednesday evening brings further showers for many, especially towards the north and the west, but increasingly through Thursday and Friday, the showers will be confined to the northwest, and we're going to see plenty of sunshine elsewhere. And what we'll also notice is a sharp upturn in temperatures, 30 Celsius or more in the southeast later.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From Midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Situation in Israel. This is the picture live in Jenin on the West Bank, where we're now being told that the identity and names of the 10 killed in this military operation coming through. Now, the striking thing is that 4 are below 18 years old, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry, at least this is. The youngest, 16 years old, the oldest, 23. The Palestinian Ministry saying 120 have been injured, or at least treated by them. them, including 20, they say, seriously wounded.
And we can also show you a live picture from Tel Aviv, where there has been a car ramming and stabbing attack, injuring 7 people, 3 of them seriously. There's been a bit more detail coming in the last few moments about that attack. Israeli police have been speaking, and they are branding it a terror attack, saying that an individual rammed his car into civilians in a populated area, this is in Tel Aviv, managing to injure 7 civilians. He got out of his vehicle and began trying to stab those around him. Luckily, there was a civilian who was armed, and he managed to neutralise this terrorist, which we don't know, but we suspect that means that
Yeah, certainly an indication perhaps that he was shot dead by a civilian who was armed, maybe possibly a reservist in the various military forces, of course, in Israel. But as you can see, still a large presence there of police and Israeli Defence Force people as they try to establish what's been happening there. We'll update you, of course, as we get more from Israel.
A High Court challenge led by 5 Conservative councils against plans to extend the capital's ultra-low emission zone has begun.
Well, they say that expansion would have a big financial impact on motorists and businesses, but London's mayor says the scheme is needed to tackle air pollution.
The current zone covers all parts of the city between the north and south circular roads, but proposals want to cover the whole of the capital by the end of next month, stretching to Enfield in the north, Bexley in the east, Croydon in the south and Heathrow in the west.
Well, let's get more now outside the Royal Courts of Justice, and Ellie, our national reporter, is there with, I think, some protesters as well have been there all morning as well, Ellie, making their point known.
Yes, good afternoon to you both. Court is absolutely packed today, but no sign so far of the Labour London Mayor Sadiq Khan. What there is, though, outside of the Royal Courts of Justice right now, if you can see just beyond this traffic, is a number of anti-ULEZ, no-to-ULEZ protesters. And obviously, this is live TV, so a bus has just decided to pull up outside there. But you may have been able to make out a coffin that was being handled by some of the protesters there, many of them holding it above their shoulders. On the side of that coffin, it says the word, does it say the word pollution? I believe so. No, democracy. It says the word democracy, obviously suggesting that democracy is dead. These protesters are insinuating that the councils were not given the time or the correct methods that they could say yes to this expansion of the ULEZ scheme. So these people here are very, very angry. They say that the expansion of the ULEZ zone is attacking the poor. It is that £12.50 daily charge to drive a vehicle through London if it isn't compliant to ULEZ, and they say that only affects London's working poor the most. So how do we end up here? How do we end up at the High Court? Well, there's been a ULEZ zone in place since April 2019, and it used to be the same as the congestion charge, so only in the very, very centre of London. That was then expanded 2 years later in October 2021, and that covered the areas up to the north and south circular roads. It then expanded, or Ms. Sadiq Khan would like it to expand again on August the 29th of this year to cover all of Greater London. So the borders would now be, they would reach as far as Buckinghamshire, Essex, Hertfordshire, Kent and Surrey. So this is a significant expansion, and as I said, it would charge drivers of the most polluting vehicles £12.50 a day. So generally that means petrol cars that were registered before 2006 and diesel cars that were registered before 2015.
Yeah.
Now, if this plan goes ahead, that would mean this is the biggest clean air zone in the world, and it would encompass 5 million people. So that is the argument that's being held in the High Court today. Essentially, 5 Conservative councils are saying that this expansion is unlawful, that they weren't consolidated about these plans enough. Sadiq Khan, London Mayor, says this is all within his powers and it's part of creating clean air in the capital.
The High Court's allowed this to proceed on 2 grounds, the legal basis for the scheme itself and the scrappage scheme as well. But basically it's an attempt at what? Judicial review? So if the judge grants this, it would stop it in its tracks while it's considered further?
Yes, exactly that. So that's what we're arguing in court at the moment. The judge did allow it to proceed on 3 grounds. That being that this is a new scheme. That's what the councils are arguing. That the expansion is too big. It cannot be included as part of the ULEZ zone that currently exists. There needed to be a new consultation process around that. They say. They also say that the London Mayor's office did not disclose important information. For example, how many vehicles this would in fact impact, how many families, for example, would have to upgrade their car. And there's also an issue about the scrappage scheme. So in these new boroughs that the ULEZ zone would encompass, those families that do not have cars that are compliant, they may not actually be eligible for those scrappage schemes where you're given a £2,000 grant, for example, in order to scrap your car. So that would be a huge problem for families that would need to upgrade their vehicle because it isn't compliant, and they would need to do so in order to make their way around London. So those are the arguments that are being brought by the councils today and at the moment. And there is a ruling to be expected in the next couple of weeks. We are expecting this to be quite quick. Court goes on holiday on the 28th of July, so we're expecting a decision before that point.
And the Mayor of London, Ellie, you know, he is saying we will continue to robustly defend this life-saving decision to expand the ULEZ. He calls it life-saving.
He does indeed call it life-saving. Sadiq Khan has got adult-onset asthma, and he says this is down to breathing in the capital's dirty air for a significant proportion of his life. He says that this is a public health problem, and he compares it to the dirty water, the sewage that we're talking about at the moment being pumped into Britain's seas, being leaked into Britain's seas. He says that we should be just as concerned about dirty air as we are about dirty water. And he often talks about that legal first in 2021 where a coroner ruled that poor air quality from vehicle emissions had actually contributed to the death of a 9-year-old girl who lived close to a very, very main road in London. She died of a severe asthma attack. So he often refers to that case, and he says that this may not be the most popular scheme, and he says politicians often aren't popular, but he considered it to be the right thing to do.
Ellie, thank you very much indeed for updating us there at the High Court. Back to you, of course, as we get more as that hearing continues. Still to come, the GB News petition to save the pound in your pocket will be putting our mouth where our money, or money where the mouth is. Speaking to our economics editor, as well as a pensioner, saying a cashless society is ruining her life. First, let's get an update on the headlines with Aaron.
It is 1:31. Good afternoon to you. Aaron Armstrong here in the GB Newsroom. Thames Water's been fined £3.3 million for pumping millions of litres of undiluted sewage into 2 rivers in 2017. The company pleaded guilty to 4 charges of polluting the rivers near Gatwick Airport over the course of 6.5 hours, killing more than 1,400 fish. The judge said she believed Thames Water had shown a deliberate attempt to mislead the Environment Agency over the incident. The company supplies 1 in 4 people in Britain with water. The family of a mother and 2 children who were murdered in a flat fire in Nottingham say they're relieved the killer has been brought to justice. A 31-year-old man's been found guilty of the murders of Fatoumata Haidara and her 2 young daughters, who died in the fire in Clifton last year. Jamie Barrow poured petrol through their letterbox. Prosecutors said Barrow, who lived in the neighbouring flat, had a grievance over rubbish being left in an alleyway and watched the fire take hold. Israeli police say 7 people have been injured, 3 of them critically, following the terrorist attack in the city of Tel Aviv. They say a Palestinian man from the West Bank drove into the crowds and tried to stab pedestrians before he was, in their words, neutralised by an armed member of the public. The Palestinian militant group Hamas have claimed responsibility, saying it's a natural response to Israel's operation in the occupied West Bank. 10 people, including 4 teenagers, have been killed after fighting in the Jenin refugee camp, which has been taking place since yesterday morning. The average rate for a 5-year fixed mortgage deal has now moved above 6%. The number of deals on the markets also dropped, driving up the costs for homeowners. The 4 major UK banks have been summoned today to a meeting with the financial watchdog over allegations of profiteering. The FCA will question bosses from HSBC, NatWest, Lloyds and Barclays over concerns savings rates are lagging behind the soaring cost of mortgages by around 4%. We're up to date for the moment. More on our stories, though, on our website. That is gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
In the latest from the financial markets, the pound buys you $1.2722, €1.1672. The price of gold, £1,517.41 per ounce. And the FTSE 100 is at 7,536 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard.
We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
And welcome back to the live desk here on GB News. Now, Buddy, can you spare a dime or a penny or any cash? Because our Don't Kill Cash campaign has now reached more than 51,000 signatures. The petition has been launched by us this week to prevent Britain becoming a cashless society.
The petition is on our website, gbnews.com/cash. Or if you've got a smartphone, use it to click on the QR code on your screen right now to take you to the petition.
Well, let's talk now to our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan, with On the Money, or is it with the cash? And of course, you're a man who doesn't have to carry cash anymore, are you? But, I mean, joking aside, I mean, this is a real issue that seems to have struck a chord with people.
It is. I mean, this petition, we literally launched it overnight. Our fabulous digital team here at GB News launched this petition. We wanted to get to 100,000 over a number of weeks because then we can apply for a parliamentary debate. Yeah. And the indication is from quite a few parliamentarians they'll be willing to take it up. But in less than 24 hours, we were already at 51,000 we just went over. That is pretty astonishing. And, you know, some of the emails and tweets we're getting are along the lines of, oh, just get with the modern age. Why do we need cash these days? Everybody can use digital. But that's the point. A lot of people can't use digital. Older people, people who aren't tech savvy. There's also the whole privacy issue. Do we want every single transaction that we make to be monitored potentially by the state?
I mean, I was reading that there's over 5 million adults still rely on cash.
Yeah.
Do you think it is a little bit of an age thing? And I asked that because I found £5 in my purse, £5 note, and I was like, wow, haven't seen that for months.
Yeah, a lot of us aren't using cash, but let's just have a quick look at some numbers here, Pip. If we look at these numbers, we see that not so long ago, I think it's back in 2018, if we can put the numbers up on the screen, 2012, 60% of transactions were still cash. Obviously, a lot of it's used cars back in 2012. Last year, these are numbers from UK Finance, a highly regarded industry body. We're now on 30% of transactions only using cash. By 2035, at this rate, it will be less than 10%. And since 2018, over 20% of ATMs have closed, and many more closed before that.
Yeah.
So what is driving this dash away from cash? It's basically business costs. It's expensive to handle cash. There's security issues handling cash, though, crikey, there are security issues with online cash as well. And we're concerned here at GB News about people who aren't so tech-savvy, older people. Think of the elderly person who's driving into a market town and they want to park and they can't put a few quid in the machine so they can park. They've got to download one of many, many apps onto their smartphone. There may not be Wi-Fi to do the download. They end up just getting a ticket. This is happening all the time.
Yeah. And you've obviously identified the demographic issue, that perhaps it is the older generations. But I guess the other thing is the split between urban and rural constituencies, because there may be, sort of garages out in the sticks that don't have a card reader.
Absolutely.
And they need the cash because they don't have the technology, and it doesn't work anywhere because there's no Wi-Fi there.
It's an age thing, Mark. It's an urban-rural thing, as you say. Maybe it's a tech-savvy, less tech-savvy thing. You know, the vast majority of younger people that you're going to meet, say, in the middle of London, of course, they'll be using cars, but that doesn't mean that young people everywhere have smartphones. You know, there are many households in this country, you know, 5 to 10% of households on some definitions, that don't have a bank account. They are the unbanked because banks won't give them an account. They haven't got the credit record or the earnings.
You're not talking about Nigel Farage again, are you?
I'm not talking about Nigel Farage again.
Is it also anything to do with hygiene and the pandemic? Because I know in my case, that's when I stopped using cash, not wanting to handle all the notes and coins that have passed through many people's hands.
Well, we were told, weren't we, during the pandemic, one of the many things that we were told, that we should avoid using cash if we can. And that certainly led to an explosion in online shopping, and it certainly accelerates an existing trend away from cash. You saw the numbers there. We were at 60% of transactions were in cash as recently, you know, little more than 10 years ago, and obviously that's changed. So I think the pandemic changed just in the way it's probably changed working from home forever. It's also changed how we use cash forever. But this was adding to a trend that was already there, I think.
Now, the other thing that people have observed, that is, if you're not using cash, are you actually spending more? Because you're not acknowledging what's going on with the card until you get that, you know, bill at the end of the month when your debit card or credit card statement comes through.
Definitely true. Definitely true. Countless surveys show this. People spend more freely when they're just going zzz with their card. And that rather than if you go out and you've got 20 quid in your wallet, that's what you spend that night.
So the retail industry is not going to actually sort of discourage that,
No, the retail industry loves it. The Treasury loves it. It gets the economy moving, it generates more tax.
And it is easier to budget with cash, isn't it?
It is easier to budget.
The whole thing about...
You go out with 20 quid in the back of your jeans pocket and that's your beer money for the night. And if you buy some beers for
that's 2 pints.
Yeah, it is now. I'm taking you back to my youth.
Yeah, double diamond.
And if you were posing at the bar and you bought a round of drinks, that meant less for you, unless you very demonstrably went away from the crowd, walked to wherever it was to get more cash out. That was a real sort of statement. Oh, I'm spending more than I thought I was going to spend. So it's partly about spending. It's also about what we call rather, let me use this phrase, surveillance capitalism. The idea that we are the product. Everything we buy, everywhere we go, all our consumer behaviour can then be sold on to third parties without our consent. If you're getting something for free, there's usually a catch, and the catch is that we are the product. And
if we get to 100,000, and this goes to parliamentary debate, is also one of the questions...
I think that's nailed on. I think that's happen, yeah.
But will one of the questions be, you are offering legal tender, so are people actually within their rights to saying, no, we don't accept cash, we're not going to accept cash, because you are offering legal tender for that?
This is the issue. You'll go to some trendy sort of fast food restaurants now, and they say, oh, we're spending all our time making your chicken perfect, rather than counting cash, i.e. we are refusing to take legal tender, so our cost base is lowered because we don't have to visit the bank, we don't have the security. I'm not sure about the legalities of refusing cash. I do think it's not a criminal issue, it's probably a civil issue, but we need to drill down into that, because just as you get some people say, I only take cash, I think that's completely fine. I don't think it's legally fine to say, we don't take cash. And that's where I think the GB News petition is going to lead to a debate in Parliament about that, as well as the much broader issue of those without smartphones, those who aren't tech-savvy. It's very similar to the idea of people who suffer from what's called the digital divide. The House of Lords Communications Select Committee...
We're trying to do their banking online, for instance.
Did a report on exactly that. They asked me to give evidence. I was privileged to give evidence as a GB News business and economics editor. And we learnt from that around 10% of households, right, they're not on the internet at all, which is unbelievable. And that's not just an older person thing, though 2/3 of people over 65 aren't on the internet, right? I mean, there are a third of them that are the so-called silver surfers, but lots of them aren't. But also, if you're a youngster in a home without the internet, it's really hard to do your homework these days when you can't email the teacher. You don't hand in homework now, you email it to the teacher. What about if you've got no Wi-Fi in your house? So it's all ends of the age spectrum.
For me also, actually, and it sounds a silly reason, but preferring cash. I remember when I was a kid, your grandparents would put money in your Christmas card, £5, £10,
well, just imagine life without
now
cash.
it goes into your bank account, and it's not the same joy.
How can you tip a waiter or waitress and be sure that they get that money? You can't. If a busker's playing music and you just want to chuck a quid into the guitar case, all that's gone. As you say, Pip, grandparents slipping a little bit of money into the hands of the grandchildren, money in birthday cards, coins at the end of your stocking. All these traditions that are surrounded by physical cash, they are all now in jeopardy.
10-bob note, remember those? You were a rich man for a 10-bob note, I tell you. Let's speak now to Juliet Casciano in Kent. Now, she says her life has been, ruined by society going cashless. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I think you found yourself stuck on quite a few occasions, is that right?
Pardon?
Can you hear us OK?
I can hear you.
OK, I was just saying, you found yourself stuck on quite a few occasions trying to pay for things, and they won't accept your money.
No, they won't, and the list goes on, and I know I'm going to sit out on my day, and it's going to completely go wrong. I go to a restaurant, they won't take cash, and so I eat, and if I don't see the sign, I just walk out. And you want to see them leg up the road to get my cash in. And then cash out of the wall, it completely disappears. Our cards get swallowed up. I've cut up a card I had to have it so I can go to New York. I've cut it completely up. Tesco's club card, I can't get my offer, and on pensions, you know, pensioners have very little money, and we need every single offer we can get, but we can't get them because to get a club card, you've got to go online. That's Tesco's only, as far as I can see. Sports centres I've been totally and utterly banned from. I can't join. I've broken both hips, and I want to go back to tennis, and I want to do this, and I want to do that, and you can't do it.
OK, we're having a little bit of difficulty with the phone line, Juliet, which I guess is another problem in trying to use the sort of mobile phones and so on. But just to ask you, I mean, do you actually have a card? Can you use a card and go online and those things?
No, I haven't got a card. I haven't got one. I've absolutely ripped it up.
Right. What you've been saying, Juliet, feeds into what Liam was talking about, in places refusing to accept cash.
Exactly.
Liam, just come in here.
That's right. Places are refusing to accept cash, as Juliet is so ably illustrating, because they don't want the costs of handling the cash. They want everything to be digital. Then their banking charges are less. They don't have to pay a member of staff, literally, to visit the bank. And the bank may be further away because so many banks are closing down. I think it's worth saying, while we got Juliet on the line, one of many GB News viewers who have been captured, if you like, by this campaign. We're now on 53,500 signatures.
Wow.
Since I've been on air, it's gone up by 2,500. So what we need to do, Juliet, is we need to get you and all your friends to get on to www.gbnews.com/cash and sign the petition. That picture we're seeing on the screen now, that's actually about 25 minutes old. We are now, and I'm literally reading off the website, at 53,500 signatures.
Bring it on.
It's now 53,660. It's going up all the time.
Juliet, I think you need to tip Liam now. Cash will do nicely. But thank you. Good luck. Thank you very much indeed for bringing us your story here on GB News. We wish you success, and of course we'll keep you updated on those figures and see how much we can get to. As Liam says, 100,000, and that will bring about the possibility of a parliamentary debate.
The King's first Holyrood week continues today, ahead of his Thanksgiving service in Edinburgh tomorrow.
Well, the King and Queen unveiling a plaque this morning at the Palace of Holyrood House to mark the Platinum Jubilee, of course, of Queen Elizabeth II. Also celebrating the 75 years of the NHS at the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh. That, of course, tomorrow, the official date, I think it is.
Yes.
Yes, it is, right, yeah.
A garden party will take place this afternoon at the Palace, and we can talk to GB News' royal correspondent Cameron Walker, who joins us live now from Edinburgh. Cameron, GB News viewers might remember us asking you yesterday about whether you were with kilt or without kilt. What's the situ today with your kilt, Cameron?
Right, well, my personal kilt is in London, I'm afraid. I am half-Scottish. I do have a Stuart of Appin kilt with me, but unfortunately I didn't think to bring it. Maybe a tartan tie will come out tomorrow. You'll have to wait and see, but unfortunately, no, just wearing a normal suit today in the rain.
But we do have a picture of you in a kilt.
Oh, yes.
Very suave.
Yeah, there we are. Yes.
Where was that taken, Cameron?
So that's just outside Edinburgh. So that was taken at a family wedding just outside Edinburgh last summer. It was a place called Carberry Tower, which actually, fun fact, the then Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret used to visit regularly. It used to be a family home when they were children. Now it's a hotel that does weddings. But yes, it was a nice kind of link to royalty. But yes, it was a family Scottish wedding.
Right, and I think there's a photo, a very famous photo of the two of them playing on those steps when they were younger. So obviously you've gone to a very historic location to put your tartan out into the... I think we can actually see... Yeah, well, there we are. Look, there are those steps with
there you are. It's the same steps.
Yeah, the chick princesses without kilts. But there were...
Yeah,
just to remind us, though, tell us what the family or the clan tartan is again.
So mine is Stuart of Appin. It comes from the West Highlands, just north of Oban. But my family grew up in Glasgow, but it's a kind of similar area, I suppose, west coast of Scotland.
Yeah, I was going to say, be very careful what you say, because you're in Edinburgh, so that could cause a few local difficulties. But just tell us what's happening now in Edinburgh today, at least. It's another very important day.
It certainly is. It's been very busy for both the King and Queen today in Edinburgh. First of all, they unveiled a plaque marking the new gate that has been put on the perimeter of the Palace of Holyrood House by Abbey Yard, so it's easier for the gardeners actually to access the old ruins of Holyrood Abbey. It used to just be a railings. It was to mark the Queen's Platinum Jubilee celebrations, the late Queen's, for celebrating 70 years of service. It's understood that the plans for this gate were actually approved by the late Queen before she passed away last September, but the King got to meet the High Constables who commissioned it. The money was raised by those High Constables, so no taxpayers' money was spent to make those gates, and I don't believe, unfortunately, the Queen ever got to see those gates in person, and certainly not at a formal ceremony, so perhaps slightly poignant for the King and Queen this morning. The blacksmith that made the iron gates is from Fife, I believe. Yes, Fife. But then the King and Queen went for a surprise visit. You were talking about the NHS slightly earlier, Mark and Pip. To mark the 75th anniversary of the NHS, they visited the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh, and they visited patients at the Elderly Meaningful Activity Centre and met with staff as well, seeing them take part in activities such as bingo and dominoes. It looked like the patients were very starstruck and very excited to see the King and Queen drop in on them. A bit of surprise, really. It was all kept very secret before the King and Queen were actually there. The Queen also visited the NHS Lothian Simpson Centre for Reproductive Health, and it was hoped that she would actually meet a few new parents who have just had their babies in the last few days or so. I haven't seen any pictures yet of the Queen meeting any new families, but if we do get them, we'll bring them straight to you. And again, they unveiled another plaque to mark the 75th anniversary of the NHS. And then, of course, tomorrow it's the big celebration of the King's coronation in Scotland, a huge service of thanksgiving in St Giles's Cathedral, where the King will be presented with the honours of Scotland. A slight controversy that's emerged this morning. The two co-leaders of the Green Party here in Scotland have essentially boycotted. They've refused to attend, even though they were invited, as has former SNP leader Alex Salmond. All three have declined an invite to that service of thanksgiving in St Giles's Cathedral tomorrow. Mr Harvey, Patrick Harvey, who is one of the co-leaders of the Green Party here in Edinburgh, in Scotland even, he said the reason being is that the monarchy is out of date and an undemocratic institution, and he's actually expected to join one of the anti-monarchy protests in Edinburgh outside Holyrood, as in the Scottish Parliament here, tomorrow, instead of attending that service of thanksgiving. As for the Scottish Tories here in Edinburgh, well, a spokesperson for them, Donald Cameron, he was saying that the decision by those Green Party MSPs is akin to student politics. So clearly quite polarising views here in Edinburgh. And perhaps some people are hoping that the pipes and drums and pomp and pageantry may drown out the protest, but we'll have to wait and see.
Indeed, and very quickly, just looking at the skies behind you, there's a garden party this afternoon at Holyrood with, I think, the Princess Royal. So is the rain going to hold off for them?
Well, Mark, if you saw me about 10 minutes ago, my umbrella started leaking because it was torrential rain. It seems to be coming and going in terms of very heavy thundery showers. And unfortunately, the forecast does seem to suggest that come the garden party starting a little bit later on this afternoon, it could be very wet indeed. So let's hope they have lots of umbrellas and marquees and no high heel shoes to sink into the grass.
Yeah, at least it could rain on the protesters as well, one might reflect. Anyway, on that note, Cameron, thank you very much indeed, and thank you for sharing your kilt picture. Much appreciated.
Lovely. Do stay with us here on the live desk on GB News. We will have all the very latest headlines at the top of the hour.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it. Like like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Weeknights on GB News from 6 p.m. You'll always get drama.
Please stop, Michelle.
I know, yeah.
Please stop.
Should I just shut up?
Romance.
You like me, I like you. There you go.
There you are. Well, don't tell anybody.
Adventure.
Etc.
That's the whole point.
And action.
Sergeant, the big read, my superstar panel. They're already at it. They're fighting. It's going to be quite a show.
Only on GB News. Britain's watching.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi.
On Mark
Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Start the day with GB News.
We catch up on all the big stories you didn't hear the night before.
And take a look at what the world's talking about this morning. That's right, Monday to Thursdays from 6 o'clock. It's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Straight after breakfast, join us, Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce. We're going to take you through till noon.
We'll be tackling the big topics of the day, including the things that the other channels just won't talk about. If it's happening here. Wake up to mornings on GB News, the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
It's 2 o'clock and welcome to the live desk here on GB News. Now, let's just alert you that at any moment the Prime Minister is expected to be questioned by senior MPs at the powerful Liaison committee in the House of Commons, and we'll have that live for you as it happens. 6 months, of course, after the Prime Minister set out those 5 priorities for government, questioned therefore on the cost of living, the state of public services, net zero and the Ukraine war. And I think the Prime Minister has just now come into that committee room. We can cross to the House of Commons.
For what you usually do for us.
Bernard Jenkin is the chair.
We've slightly altered the order because Sir Bob Neill has to speak in the Estimates Day debate. So we will take him first, and he will be referring to the fact that the Liaison Committee itself has launched an inquiry to explore Select Committee scrutiny of strategic thinking across government. With which I can assure you that the civil service and ministers are already well engaged, and we look forward to that being a positive inquiry. Sir Bob Neill.
Thank you very much, Sir Bernard. Prime Minister, I was tempted to say I'm opening the bowling, but maybe that's not the appropriate start for today. But I wanted to refer to the inquiry that the Liaison Committee has set up, because we attempt, after all, to coordinate the activity of all the select committees. And the purpose of the inquiry is to look at the way government seeks to coordinate policy and decisions and action across government departments. Do you recognise that there is a problem with the UK government activities being very siloed?
Well, I think that has historically been a concern of government. I mean, I saw that as Chancellor, actually, probably most acutely when I was doing spending reviews, where obviously departments would focus on the things that were most important to them, and some of those areas that required departments to work together to put in bids were probably less developed than you might like. Actually, the early years being an obvious example of that. So, I mean, I can certainly see why the perception is there, and as I said, I suggested elements of that as Chancellor.
Can I draw the position of the Ministry of Justice to your attention as an example of this, as a department whose funding is not protected in financial terms, but which is frequently under pressure because of failures in other parts of the system. For example, people end up in the justice system because they've had chaotic lifestyles. Families are broken up. They've been failed by social services. They've been failed at school. They've been failed by drug testing programmes. What is the means whereby government can take into account the pressures that are placed upon that downstream department, which is the recipient of the failures elsewhere? Is there a mechanism to recognise that and to join up policy across those areas?
Yes, so actually when I was Chancellor we established something called the Shared Outcomes Fund, which funded departments to do exactly this, to work together, particularly where they could tackle some of the problems that need upstream or downstream, depending on your perspective, intervention. As early years as one I mentioned, where actually the Supporting Families programme, what used to be called the Troubled Families programme, is a good example of that, where work was done to evaluate the benefit of that programme on outcomes in education or the criminal justice system, so that government overall could understand the value of that programme. It shouldn't just be something that MHCLG or DLUC should be concerned with, because actually all these departments were benefiting one way or another from that programme. So that's the type of thinking that I try to introduce as Chancellor, and I think that programme is a good example where there was clear evidence that it was having an impact beneficially on criminal justice outcomes.
Two quick examples. The Home Office is recruiting 20,000 extra police officers. That's government policy. What steps are being taken to properly fund the Ministry of Justice for the extra court time that will be taken up by hopefully those police officers capturing more offenders and potential prison time? Because at the moment they are not covered to pick up the costs for those extra police officers doing their job.
So, I mean, actually, my recollection, because I was Chancellor at the time that the funding for that was put in place, was that the downstream impact of the 20,000 police officers were calculated and funded as part of the original settlement for all those departments to deliver on the 20,000 police officers commitment. I was Chancellor at the time, and I distinctly remember those conversations and that modelling happening, with particular focus on the downstream cost, because you're absolutely right, we can't just focus on the cost of the police officers. Obviously that has a knock-on impact elsewhere. But my recollection is that was funded as part of the settlement at the time for the 20,000 police officers uplift programme.
To try and join up matters, at least within the criminal justice world, there was something called the Criminal Justice Board that was established back in 2015. It hasn't actually met since 2021, but it still appears in existence on the government website. Got an excellent Lord Chancellor. Could you perhaps assist him to get that Criminal Justice Board up and operating again? Because there's a real concern of a lack of join-up across this sector.
So I'm very happy to make sure that the join-up is happening, and actually for example, on tackling illegal migration, that's something where I regularly convene different departments, particularly Home Office and Ministry of Justice, because it requires, and indeed actually DLUC and others, because it requires a cross-government coordination to deliver on the priorities. And I'll happily look at making sure that we are coordinated and joined up. I'm not sure what the exact right structure is sitting here, but I very much am sympathetic to the thrust of the question.
Just a potential cost savings if we can get it right.
And again, which is to the benefit of the individuals and indeed the taxpayer, where we can realise those.
And the final point I was going to raise, Sir Byrne, very quickly, is this. You've recognised in the past, Prime Minister, the importance of the reputation of the English legal system for the United Kingdom's standing in the world. In October, England and Wales will have its first woman Chief Justice. Will you make a point of making an early opportunity to meet with Dame Sue Carr when she takes up her appointment, so you can learn from her firsthand the real pressures that there are on the courts? Because delays of 2 years or so for a small business to have a money claim that can make all the difference to its survival, heard in the county courts, for example, are really not acceptable or fair. Would you agree?
Yeah, so actually met already with the previous Lord Chief Justice, I think a couple of different times since I've been Prime Minister, and I fully expect that I will continue those meetings and engagement with the new Lord Chief Justice. And we are focused very hard on reducing the court backlog. Obviously, more funding has gone into it, as the committee will be aware, but also we've removed the limit on sitting days in the Crown Court. We've continued to use the, I believe, 16 Nightingale courtrooms, and actually we raised the statutory retirement age for judicial office holders, all of which are initiatives that help expand judicial capacity to help us get through the backlogs. But it remains a commitment and a focus of ours, but I look forward to discussing that with the new Lord Chief Justice in due course.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sir Bob. We're now moving on to the all-important subject of the Russian aggression in Ukraine and other associated security issues, with Alicia Cairns, Chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee.
Thank you, Chair. Prime Minister, I fear that we are on the cusp of the Gaza crisis of 2023. Yesterday we took up presidency of the UN Security Council. How do you hope that over this month we will use that to shed a light on what is taking place, but also what outcomes will we achieve during our presidency?
So what were you referring in specifically to, Alicia?
So the Gaza crisis, so essentially Israel-Palestine, but also as President of the UN Security Council the next month, what have you tasked Foreign Office civil servants to achieve?
Well, I think there's a couple of different things. Obviously, with regard to the current situation in Israel and around, of course we support Israel's right to self-defense and have condemned the recent terrorist attacks. We would say that the protection of civilians must be prioritised in any military operation, and would urge the IDF to demonstrate restraint in its operation and for all parties to avoid further escalation in both the West Bank and Gaza, both now and in the days ahead, and also call on Israel to adhere to principles of necessity and proportionality when defending their legitimate security interests. More broadly, with regard to the UN Security Council and our actions there, I would imagine that we will continue to focus on highlighting what's happening in Ukraine, Russia's illegal invasion. I think one thing that we have helped, play a leading role in is ensuring broad support at the UN condemning Russian action. Over 140 different countries have signed the resolutions that we have helped to support in the UN, and that will continue, I would imagine, to be a focus in the coming weeks and months. And I think recent events in Russia highlight from others the illegality of Russia's invasion, and I think hopefully other countries are recognising that and will continue to use the UN as a platform to highlight that.
So just before we move on to Ukraine, in your discussions with Netanyahu, how clear were we that we should not see an expansion of illegal settlements, and will we see Israel-Palestine brought forward specifically by the British government then over the next month?
So settlements are illegal under international law, and we've said that they present an obstacle to peace and threaten the physical viability of a two-state solution. We've consistently engaged with Israel, and obviously I met President Netanyahu a little while ago, and we've repeatedly made clear to Israel that we oppose any settlement expansion, and we've asked the Israeli government to halt and reverse its policy.
And moving then to Ukraine, there are reports that ahead of the Vilnius summit, I guess a coalition of the willing will bring forward some sort of security support package, a security agreement for Ukraine. Can you set out for me what your vision would be for such a security agreement for Ukraine?
Well, not wanting to preempt the conversations that are obviously happening in private, what I have said is that I think it would be beneficial for Ukraine and for the conflict for there to be a multilateral declaration of support for Ukraine into the long term. There are various different shapes and forms that can take. Those conversations are happening. The purpose of that declaration, assuming it can be something that gathers broad support, is to demonstrate that support for Ukraine will be in place for the long term. I think that will send a strong signal to Putin that his efforts are in vain, and ultimately he should recognise that we, the coalition of the willing who are defending principles of territorial integrity in the UN Charter, are not going to go away and will continue to give Ukraine the support it needs and the means to defend itself against current and future aggression. But so those conversations are ongoing.
And what's your level of confidence that at Vilnius we will see a path to NATO membership for Ukraine set out and agreed?
Again, those conversations are ongoing. As you all know, NATO is a consensus organisation, and so we're having those conversations with our partners. You know, what's very clear, I've said previously in the past that Ukraine's rightful place is in NATO, but the alliance works by consensus, so we will have to work together with our allies. But there are things that we are already doing that will help Ukraine on that journey, notably increasing the interoperability of capabilities, the training of Ukrainian troops to NATO standards, and the provision of NATO standard equipment. All are examples of that type of support that will help Ukraine not just now, but on that longer term journey as well.
Thank you. Moving us to the Balkans, there has been an international failure of deterrence when it comes to the Western Balkans. I think that's best exemplified by the EU and US response and recent punishments of Kosovo in the face of Serb antagonism and Dodik's secessionist rhetorics in Bosnia and Herzegovina. As Prime Minister, will you now commit that we will rejoin U4, which I'd add that both Turkey and Chile are members of? And will you also consider lobbying for an expansion of KFOR's mandate in Kosovo so that they can deal with the illegal arms being brought across from Serbia into Kosovo, which are arming illegal Belgrade-funded and armed militias in Kosovo?
Well, first thing to say is we in the government fully support Bosnia and Herzegovina's territorial integrity and sovereignty, and will continue to take measures against those who threaten that. I'm particularly concerned about the situation in the north of Kosovo, which you'll be familiar with, and very much condemn the unprovoked attacks by protesters on KFOR personnel. The Foreign Secretary has already told the Prime Ministers of both Kosovo and Serbia that leaders in Belgrade and Pristina do have a responsibility to reduce tension and prevent further violence. Our view is we must find a way back to the EU-facilitated dialogue. With regard to EU4, we do see EU4 as vital for peace and security in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And our non-participation in it doesn't reflect the importance of the operation to the peace and stability of the region, and we're going to continue to explore opportunities to widen cooperation with the mission.
Thank you. I would urge the government to look very close to that. And then very briefly, just taking back to Israel-Palestine, just a yes or no answer. Okay. Would you now put in place a special envoy for the Middle East peace process to make sure we have the adequate attention on what's going on there?
I think, look, it's something that I know the FCDO are talking to the Honourable Lady about, and happy to continue talking to her about. We continue to say that's something that we'll be open to at a time that we think it will be beneficial to the peace process. So it's not that we're against it in principle, it's just figuring out when it can
I'm going to take that as a yes, but subject to announcement, hopefully. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Prime Minister, I'm not using my time in this session for the benefit of others, but two supplementaries very briefly. We're confronting Russian aggression in Ukraine very vociferously and very clearly. How confident are you that the international community is not appeasing proxy Russian aggression in the Balkans?
I don't believe that we are, and as I've heard from my answers to Alicia, we're continuing to take quite a robust stance against proxies, not just in that region, but previously in Africa as well with Wagner, because where we see threats to territorial integrity and sovereignty, I think it's important that we do our best to stand up for them, and that's what we're doing.
The war in Ukraine will last as long as the friends of democracy around the world allow it to last. The more support we can give, the quicker it will end successfully for the Ukrainians. Are we doing enough, and what more could we be doing?
Well, we've, I think as everybody knows, providing £2.3 billion in military support for Ukraine this year, matching what we've given last year, which I believe puts us second only to the Americans. But I think it's more, as well as just the quantum of support, it's a type of support where we have been consistently out in front in the type of capability that we are providing to the Ukrainians and training them on. That you saw that with main battle tanks, which I was the first leader to announce we would provide, and then most recently with Storm Shadow long-range weapons, which are having a beneficial impact on the current state of the conflict. And we will continue to do that, look for opportunities to provide Ukrainians with the support they need. The priority remains, as it always has been, heavy armour, artillery, long-range weapons and training, most recently combat air, where we will play our part as part of an international coalition to provide combat capabilities, particularly training of pilots, and we're starting that this summer, in fact, which is something that I know the Ukrainians have warmly welcomed. And we continue to talk to other countries about increasing their support for Ukraine, both in quantum and in capability, and I think that is important at this stage, because the priority is to ensure that the counteroffensive can be as successful as we would all like it to be.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Greg Clark on science and technology and AI.
Thank you, Sir Bernard. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Prime Minister, a few days ago you told London Tech Week that the possibilities of AI are extraordinary. What do you see as the biggest positive impact of artificial intelligence?
Well, I think just in the last few weeks in the news reporting, you've seen some of the promise of AI, paralysed people being able to walk, the kind of cracking of the structure of almost every known protein, and starting to be able to model reactions in nuclear fusion. So it just gives you a sense of the variety that is there. And also when you combine that with the computational power of quantum, I think you can really start to imagine a future in which even incurable diseases like cancer and dementia or new ways to grow crops all might be possible. For me, I'd kind of put it in a couple of different categories. I think straightforwardly on the economy side, an interesting report from PwC recently that estimated a kind of 10% GDP benefit over the coming decade. You're starting to see that in the way that companies are using AI, and indeed leading companies like Palantir opening their European AI HQ here, and the quality of our research, etc. So that's on the economic side. And I've spoken in the past about AI holding out the promise of being a general purpose technology, and the economic research is very clear that that leads to a kind of J-curve effect in productivity that we are on the cusp of hopefully realising. And then in public services, I'd say health and education are the two areas where I'm excited, particularly in healthcare. I think people are reasonably familiar with the opportunity to speed up diagnosis of a range of different conditions, but also improve the productivity and accuracy of, for example, people looking for skin cancers. There's interesting derm AI technology that is being deployed, or robotic surgery. And then in education, the opportunity to reduce workload for teachers, whether it's lesson planning or marking, but then also provide personalised tuition for children. The Khan Academy is starting to roll out an AI chatbot, which has, I think, enormous potential, because we know that more personalised approach to learning has huge benefits for children, particularly disadvantaged children. And tutoring in the physical sense is hard to scale, but the technology allows us to provide that, and I think that would be transformational.
Absolutely. So lots of upsides. But in that speech to London Tech Week, you said that we must do AI safely. So what do you see as the biggest danger of AI?
So I would categorise the risks into a few different buckets. I think first, there's the socioeconomic risk from the large-scale societal shifts that the technology will bring. And that's often what technology does. That doesn't mean you should stand in the way of it, but it just needs to make sure that we're cognizant of it and provide people with the skills they need to flourish in a world that is being changed by technology. I think the second is the risk of misuse. And that is, whether it's open source models or otherwise, the ability that they can be used as tools to generate misinformation or identify and exploit cyber vulnerabilities or create harmful content or deep fakes or child sexual abuse. That's the kind of second category. I think the third category would be tool use, whereby foundation models can be used to activate capabilities in the real world. And then the last category is what people would describe as capability overhangs. And that kind of trends into the area of more existential risk, because there's just a lack of understanding at this point about what the potential of these models might be. Now, obviously separate to all of that, there are national security risks, which I'm sure the Honourable Gentleman acknowledged. I appreciate I'm limited in what I can say, but I think thinking about it in those four categories is probably the right way to go about it.
Thank you. And you've convened an international safety summit for the autumn. Are you intending that to be a summit of like-minded countries like the US and Japan, perhaps? Or is it for all countries, a bit like the International Atomic Energy Authority that includes countries like China and Russia? What do you have in mind?
I think, look, I think in the first instance, mainly what we're trying to do is acknowledge that there is a global dimension to this challenge. And AI doesn't respect national borders. Countries are at varying stages of their thinking about how we can put guardrails in place to make sure that we can realise the benefits of AI in a way that's safe and secure, and it seems a sensible and reasonable step to just try and bring some of those countries together to talk about these problems in a collective forum, because ultimately there will need to be some coordination.
Sure.
So I think it's quite early thinking. As I said, it's more just about bringing people together.
So who are countries together?
Well, it's just bringing people together who are thinking about these things in a similar way, to exchange ideas, share information, as I said, because AI doesn't respect national borders, and I think we will all benefit from hearing and talking to each other in a conversation with the businesses themselves. And I think that is really what this is about. I think we're a long way from anyone establishing a AIA, IAA equivalent for AI. Those things are long into the distance, but in the first instance, just talking through this with like-minded countries seems a sensible
Finally,
next step.
Prime Minister, you've got this summit. You published a white paper in March. The last session of this Parliament begins in November. Will there be? Do you expect there to be an AI bill in the King's Speech?
I'm not going to comment now on fourth session legislation. All those conversations are happening and no final decisions are being made. I think actually what we need to do, and I think probably we can do lots of this without legislation, is sitting down and figuring out what are the safety features and guardrails that we'd like to put in place. And I think we have a sense of what some of those might be, whether it's watermarking, whether it's pre-release information sharing, whether it's reporting and licensing of large training runs, whether it's pre-training or pre-deployment disclosure, transparency on the data sets that are used. I think that's the kind of category of things that we need to spend time on, which is why the Foundation Model Task Force has been set up and funded specifically in its early phase to focus on safety research. I think it's an area where the UK can lead because we already have good capability in it. So if we can develop that capability further, because it's a growing field, it will mean that we will know what to do. And it may well be, and actually so far, the conversations with the three leading foundation model companies have been incredibly cooperative.
But they're calling for legislation.
I think what they want are for governments to put in place the guardrails, and they're very open about that, and they're very, I say thus far, they have been incredibly constructive and open and transparent with government, and want to try and find a solution together, which, as I said, it's too early to preempt what all that might look like, but you can imagine a world where at least the initial stages of that don't require legislation necessarily, but actually just require us to get in there and do safety evaluation on the models and have access to them. And I said we've had announcements already from some of those foundation model companies that they will provide that access to the government to be able to do that on a priority basis, which I'm grateful for and I think will help us get this right.
Thank you, Promise.
I'm sorry, we're dragging behind. People are going to have to be quicker and I'll have to be stricter. Dame Diana Johnson, Home Affairs.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Prime Minister. I know you're appealing the Court of Appeal's ruling on the Rwanda scheme. You've said this policy is an important part of your plan to tackle illegal migration and stop small boats. So do you have a plan for what you'll do if the appeal fails?
As I said, our belief remains that the plan that we have is legal, it's compliant with all our obligations, and we'll be appealing it vigorously. And if you look at the ruling, what you'll see is the Lord Chief Justice, in his opinion, agreed with the High Court and with the government that the safeguards and reassurances that we have received from Rwanda are sufficient. There's a very specific point of contention about the onward relocation, potentially, of people who we send to Rwanda. I said we believe that the safeguards we have are sufficient, so we'll continue to confidently and vigorously pursue our case.
So you're betting everything on the Rwanda policy being upheld in the Supreme Court?
Well, no, that's not. I think that's not a fair characterisation of what we're doing.
Well, it's a gamble, isn't it? You're not sure.
Last year and indeed this year, I set out a range of things that we're doing to tackle this problem.
Yes.
So, for example,
can I come on to that, because I've got some specific questions of what you're going to say.
Just answer, because you answered the question. It could be a very substantive additional piece is the new deal that we have with Albania.
Yeah,
Albania
with the greatest respect, Prime Minister, I've got very little time and I do want to get through some important issues with you. So if I could just leave that, I got your.
I think you made
response.
A statement that we're betting the house on one thing. I think it's reasonable for me to say, well, let me give you an example of something else that is significant. That is making a difference
with the
to
greatest
the
respect, Dame Diana.
With the greatest respect, Prime Minister, I've got quite a few questions I want to ask. So you're clear that you think Rwanda's going to succeed in the Supreme Court. Just on the small boats issue, I think it's 6 months today since you made your 5 promises to the British people, including stopping the small boats. Now, win or lose in the Court of in the Supreme Court, right now your plans around Rwanda are on hold. So does that mean your attempt to stop the small boats, that's on hold at the moment?
No, and a good example of why it's not on hold is our deal with Albania. Albania accounted for 1/3 of illegal migrants that crossed last year. We looked at, and that is surprising given that Albania is clearly a safe country and it's an ally, European nation, and it's a signatory to many of the same treaties that we are on these issues, which is why our new deal with Albania and a revision in how we treat illegal migrants from Albania means.
I know you're very keen to talk about Albania, but I'm very keen to actually address the fact that in June,
well,
so
you asked for an example of being committed to continuing to stop the boats outside of the Rwanda policy. This is a very good example of something that, as I said, we've returned almost 2,000 illegal migrants.
But none from actually who came across last year. None of the returns actually relate to people who travelled in small boats last year, do they?
Because we work through the backlog of people we've got. But because of the new deal, we are now able to return people to Albania, and you can start to see the early benefit of that deterrence because in the most recent data that we had, the number of illegal migrants from Albania had reduced considerably since we put that new deal in place.
Okay, let's move on from
Albania. It shows that you can make a difference on this policy.
The largest number of people who crossed the Channel in small boats last year, the largest number in any of the records that have been kept over the last 5 years, 3,824. The majority or a large chunk come from Afghanistan. So what I'm just trying to get to is, with the rate of progress that you're making at the moment, when do you think you'll be able to fulfil your pledge to stop the small boats?
I said, obviously, the court will have to determine its own ruling, and that is outside of the government's hands. It's the court that determines the timing of its rulings. But in the meantime, we can get on with a range of other things, as I said. We talk about the deal in Albania. The other thing, one of the other things we're doing.
You've talked about the deal in Albania quite a lot.
Well, actually, we'll move on to one of the other things we're doing is tackling illegal working to show people that if they do come here illegally, they won't be able to disappear into the black economy. So one of the things we've done is increase the number of illegal working raids by about 50%.
Can I just ask you some questions that relate?
And again, all of that will contribute, I believe, to a deterrent effect.
Okay. With the greatest respect, Prime Minister, I want to ask you this. The illegal migration bill, which was introduced earlier this year, since the bill was introduced, 8,128 people have crossed the Channel in small boats. So if we assume your Rwanda policy is upheld in the Supreme Court, Rwanda has said they can take a capacity of 500 people. So that leaves 7,628 who've come across since the bill was introduced. What do you intend will happen to those people?
As I said, I'm not going to talk about a private commercial contract that we have, but our Rwanda scheme, as we have said multiple times, is uncapped.
Okay.
So I think
that's
that is
not what
important.
the Rwandans say, is it?
Well, the Rwanda scheme is uncapped, and which is why I believe it can act as a very helpful deterrent when the scheme is up and running.
Can I move on to your other promise, which is around dealing with the backlog? And when you came last time, you said you were going to double the workforce, triple productivity, and re-engineer the system to deal with the backlog, the legacy backlog. Yet the National Audit Office has found the Home Office is not yet making enough decisions to actually achieve your target of clearing that part of the backlog by December 23. So I just wondered what's going wrong, because you were very chipper last time about how you were going to deliver this.
Yes, so I think when I made the announcement, the legacy initial asylum backlog was around 92,000. When I gave the update earlier this year, that had reduced by almost a fifth, by about 17,000 down to around 74,000. So that is the progress that has already been made in reducing the legacy initial asylum backlog. And as I said, those numbers were when I last gave the update, but they were down by around a fifth.
So you'll deliver by December?
Your time's up. Sorry. Moving on to the cost of living crisis, Harriet Baldwin for the Treasury Committee.
Thank you very much, Sir Bernard. Now, Prime Minister, we're halfway through the year and you want to halve inflation this year. And how is that going? What probability would you assign to you achieving that by the end of the year?
Well, I'll leave that to the forecasters, but we remain committed to bringing inflation down. And halfway is a step on it going back down to the inflation target, which is obviously even lower than that. And now it's clearly inflation proving more persistent than people anticipated, but that doesn't...
What's happening?
So the Prime Minister continuing to answer these questions in this liaison committee, but being pressed quite hard on the issue of the Rwanda policy and the small boats, now being questioned on the cost of living, but clearly uncomfortable perhaps with being closely questioned on this particular issue. And Catherine is with us in the studio. It's interesting that we're learning he's not going to be at Prime Minister's questions tomorrow to be pressed on these various issues, nor it seems maybe one or two other PMQs. So this underlines the importance of these MPs being able, or at least the chairs of these committees being able to ask him these questions.
Yes, I mean, this is a big moment for Rishi Sunak. There's 2 or 3 of these every year. The Prime Minister is questioned intensively for about 90 minutes, so there's no sort of ducking away from the questions. I thought it was interesting with Diana Johnson then on the small boats. Rishi Sunak was clearly desperate to talk about Albania.
As a
but
success story. Yeah.
He didn't like the repeated Diana Johnson with the greatest respect, because the record is not good, is it? But in terms of Prime Minister's questions, he won't be there tomorrow. We know that it will be Angela Rayner and Deputy Prime Minister Oliver Dowden, and he will then have missed 4. Now, as a percentage, that puts him at the bottom of all Prime Ministers since Margaret Thatcher. He will basically have only been to 83% of them. He's going to be at the NATO summit next week as well in Lithuania, so he's going to miss that one.
Yeah, tomorrow because of the NHS 75th anniversary. That occasion just, well, literally round the corner from the House of Commons chamber.
We presume, we don't have the timings of that ceremony, but we're presuming that that's why he won't be there, and he won't be there next week either. So only to have made sort of 4 out of 5 of them on average is not ideal. I mean, clearly he's very comfortable on the world stage, perhaps a little bit less comfortable under the sort of scrutiny that he's getting.
It's interesting. Just to look at the figures, John Major made 88% of PMQs, Margaret Thatcher 92%, Tony Blair 95%, although, of course, Blair made it a once-a-week occasion because previously it had been twice a week.
Yes, and Boris Johnson made 94% of his. I mean, the only person that's got a 100% hit rate is, of course, Liz Truss, but I mean, she can't really take it as a badge of glory because there were only 3.
But I mean, Boris Johnson sort of thrived in that with that sort of style of questioning, didn't he? Whereas I'm not sure Rishi Sunak is as comfortable with it, and neither is he as comfortable sitting here being probed forensically like he was by Dame Diana Johnson. And it's quite difficult, isn't it, for these MPs as well, because they've only got a specific amount of time to ask the questions that they want to ask, and Rishi Sunak can just waffle a bit, and you know, Dame Diana Johnson really having to really press to get him to answer.
Yes,
numerous questions.
And she was cut off in the end, wasn't she? Because she was then told, "Sorry, you're out of time."
And it was quite an important question that about the legacy backlog, and would he meet his target by the end of the year, wasn't it?
Exactly. And she was also saying that Rwanda, that they'd said they could only take 500 people in total. The Prime Minister was saying, no, that's not right.
He's saying Rwanda is uncapped.
Uncapped. But we know, don't we, that the government have already spent tens of millions of pounds on this project. Not a single person has gone to Rwanda. We don't honestly know if anybody ever will. So a
and I
lot of
don't
money
think
has
we got
been
an
spent.
answer to the question, what is your plan B, effectively, if this appeal fails in the Supreme Court? What happens next? We didn't really get an answer on that, did we?
No, we didn't at all. And of course, Rishi Sunak was clinging to the fact that the judgment last week, it was a split judgment. The most senior judge found in favour of the government. OK, it's now going to the Supreme Court. They feel it will go their way, but it might not. And the whole point of Rwanda was it was to be a disincentive, so people would think, all right, well, I'm in France. If I go to the UK, I'm going to get sent to Rwanda. I'd rather just stick in France or go somewhere else. If you can't get that off the ground and at least send some people, it's very difficult. I mean, we've got 500 million that we're spending with the French over the next 3 years. They're intercepting a lot of crossings, but there's still tons of people coming across, aren't there? And now the weather's changed.
I mean, Dame Diana Johnson said to him, it's a gamble for you. You know, you're putting everything on your pledge to, help me out, Catherine, to meet this migration target.
Yeah.
And it's all on Rwanda. And it might not happen. It might not happen before the next election that we get a decision from the Supreme Court.
Yeah, it might not. I mean, we're saying that other European countries are starting to look at similar possibilities as well. And the World Bank, I think, have estimated that by 2050, there'll be something like 216 million people on the move, largely because of climate change, trying to get to Europe, North America, wherever, millions and millions of people going forward. How are we going to deal with this?
OK, we've got an hour and a half of this, 90 minutes. We won't stay with it for all that time because it is a little bit dry, but just very quickly, what do you think the backbenchers, the Tory backbenchers, will be making this? Not just what he's saying, how he's saying it. How does he appear?
He appears a little bit flat, I think, doesn't he? And a bit tired. I mean, it's understandable he's had a rough ride, but of course, he needs to try to still project confidence, a positive vision, and
I've got this. That phrase. You seem.
It doesn't really feel like that today.
Catherine, thanks for the moment, and of course we'll continue to monitor what's being said by the Prime Minister at that liaison committee. Plenty more coming up. Stay with us here on GB News and the Live Desk.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often they will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christys, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Welcome back to the live desk on GB News. A High Court challenge led by 5 Conservative councils against plans to extend the capital's ultra-low emission zone is currently underway.
Well, those councils include Bexley, Bromley, Hillingdon and Harrow. Surrey, too, challenging the expansion amid concerns that the scheme could harm, they say, local businesses.
Joining us now is leader of Bexley Council, Teresa O'Neill. Good to have you on the live desk. Thanks for talking to us. How confident are you that this court case will be successful?
So you never like to take these things for granted. Obviously, we've put forward a good case. We've got phenomenal backing from our residents, and we hope that obviously the judge will come out with the right decision.
And Teresa, what is the, just tell us very simply, but just tell us very concisely, what is the nub of your case?
Well, the reality is we're all in favour of better air quality, but we do not believe this is the right way of achieving it, especially in outer London. So a place like Bexley, really poor transport infrastructure, so we're quite dependent on the car. You know, we've got no tube networks in Bexley. You won't find a tube station, so people are very reliant. This is being brought forward very quickly. The evidence isn't there to show it's going to make a dramatic difference, and therefore we think it's the wrong thing to do.
Is it political in that all the local authorities taking this challenge are Tory, and of course we have a London mayor who is Labour?
No, it's political in the fact that actually the mayor is taking action against those that can least afford it. So, I mean, the stories that, you know, I've had and the people that have come on to me, you know, these are probably the poorest people in our borough that really can't afford to be going out there and changing their car. It's also a pretty poor message to say you can pollute the air if you believe that's the case, if you can afford it. And also, you know, getting rid of all these cars. You know, how is that fitting with an environmentally friendly strategy?
This is the scrappage scheme, which is part of the legal action as well.
That's right, yes, and we believe that's not been thought through correctly. If people are successful in applying for it, from a car's point of view, you get something like £2,000. Well, frankly, that won't pay for a compliant car, will it? You know, and also there is quite a lengthy lead into buying cars as well, so that doesn't help either. As far as vans are concerned, you know, lots of people's jobs potentially at risk because theirs is a little bit more, but still isn't sufficient to replace a van. And I know a Labour MP suggested you could take your tools on the tube. Yeah. Well, number one, you'd have to find a tube in Bexley, and number two, actually, how does that work for a number of small van men?
What would you say, Teresa, to families in your area that are living near these busy roads that might have various health conditions, including asthma, etc., and that actually they will really benefit from this ULEZ scheme being expanded? Their health will benefit. Oh, I think we might have lost Teresa, which is a great shame. Don't know whether she's going to unfreeze any second.
No, I think we've lost the link to her. But just to update, of course, the fact that they are challenging both the move on the scrappage scheme and indeed expanding it. Just to update you, Sadiq Khan's legal team rejecting the challenge, saying that the move was entirely lawful and that ample information had been provided to all the councils for a fair consultation. So the hearing underway. We'll update, of course, as we get more from that, the High Court.
Let's talk, though, King Charles and his first Holyrood week, which is continuing ahead of his Thanksgiving service in Edinburgh, which is taking place tomorrow.
Well, the King and Queen unveiling a plaque this morning at the Palace of Holyrood House to mark the Platinum Jubilee of Queen Elizabeth II, of course, that previous occasion, but also celebrating 75 years of the NHS at the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh.
A garden party is taking place this afternoon at the Palace, and GB News royal correspondent Cameron Walker can join us live from Edinburgh. We were saying earlier, Cameron, I think you've answered my question, it was looking like that garden party was going to be full of soggy sandwiches.
Yes, I think it's fair to say that is incredibly likely at this point. It keeps coming and going. It gets heavier than this. It has been heavier than this. But nonetheless, I think it's pretty obvious that it's not going to be very, very sunny for this garden party. Celebrating the King's coronation, we had 2 garden parties at Buckingham Palace earlier in the year. I think they're in May, and this one is at the Palace of Holyrood House. The King and the Queen and the Princess Royal will be hosting it with lots of invited guests, so let's hope they've got their umbrellas and their marquees at the ready. But of course, this is Holyrood Week. There are a number of different engagements going on. Today, the King and Queen unveiled a plaque commemorating the new Platinum Jubilee gates that has been installed on the perimeter of the Palace of Holyrood House. It's going to make it easier for the gardeners, I'm told, to access the ruins of Holyrood Abbey there. It used to just be a railing and they had to go the long way around, so good for them. But the whole point, of course, is to commemorate the late Queen's Platinum Jubilee, 70 years of service. It's understood that she actually approved the plans for this gate before she passed away in September, but there was never any official or formal presentation of the gates to Her Majesty, so perhaps quite poignant for the King and Queen here in Edinburgh this morning. They then made a surprise visit, Their Majesties, to the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh, and they spent some time with some elderly patients there at the Meaningful Activity Centre, seeing them take part in dominoes and bingo as well. The Queen also visited a unit of the hospital for new families, new mothers, and their postnatal units as well. We don't have any pictures as of yet of the Queen visiting that unit, but as you can see on your screens for those of you watching on television, there was lots of very surprised patients when the King and Queen rocked up there. And then, of course, as we've just discussed, they've got a very wet garden party going on later on this afternoon. But tomorrow is the official celebration of the King's coronation in Scotland, with a service of thanksgiving at St Giles Cathedral, where he will be presented with the honours of Scotland, the oldest set of crown jewels in the British Isles. Slight controversy this morning. There's a few anti-monarchist politicians here in Scotland who have effectively boycotted the service of thanksgiving despite having invites. The 2 co-leaders of the Green Party here in Scotland, Patrick Harvey and Lorna Slater. Mr Harvey is actually going to be joining one of the Republican protests outside Holyrood. That's the Parliament here in Scotland tomorrow. Also, the former leader of the SNP, Alex Salmond, he is also not going to be attending the service of thanksgiving. There's a Republic protest, the people with the big yellow signs, which you may have seen over the last couple of months. They are going to be protesting on the Royal Mile as the procession is taking place of the Honours of Scotland from Edinburgh Castle, which is behind me, down to St Giles Cathedral, and of course the procession of members of the royal family, including the King, the Queen, and the Prince and Princess of Wales, known as the Duke and Duchess of Rothesay in Scotland, from the Palace of Holyrood House all the way up to St Giles Cathedral. So perhaps the pomp and pageantry will drown out the protesters, but nonetheless, I think they are going to have a pretty hefty presence here in Edinburgh tomorrow.
Yeah, and I think in terms of talking of the royal team, I think the Princess Royal was due to attend the garden party this afternoon. Of course, I think I'm right in saying still patron of the Scottish Rugby Union.
Yes, I believe that is the case. In terms of, yes, that is the case. I was trying to figure out who William and Catherine were, but yes, William is Wales rugby and Catherine is England rugby, and Princess Anne, as you rightly say, is Scottish rugby there. And yes, as far as we are aware, we haven't heard otherwise. The Princess Royal is expected to attend the garden party at the Palace of Holyrood later on today with the King and Queen.
All right, and we'll mention the kilt maybe tomorrow once more, because let's just reflect, the King did wear his kilt for the first engagement yesterday, so no pressure on you for tomorrow, but we'll update you on that a little later. Kilt
you won't
and
want
umbrella.
to wear it if the weather's like this, will
Indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Cameron, updating us there in Edinburgh.
Yeah, thank you. Now, Wimbledon fans who were queuing for hours yesterday and may well have had a long wait today, they have been warned to allow extra time. In fact, yesterday they had to wait for 10 hours with what was described as airport-like security. And there's been lots of drama so far on the tennis courts.
Yes, just remind you, Venus Williams out. Djokovic, though, is through. But it's not just what's happening, of course, on the courts. Let's speak to TJ Wilson, who has left the scene because it was so wet. We saw the rain falling in Edinburgh. It's been falling in SW19 as well, then?
Yeah, very much so, I'm afraid.
So tell us what decision did you make and at what time to bail out, literally?
Yeah, so I started queuing at about 6:20 this morning and got in at about 11:30, and then had a good solid half an hour of great tennis before the skies opened. And then after about an hour and a half of sitting there, I thought maybe I'll just... Luckily, I only live about half an hour away, so I was able to just come home, and I thought it might be more fun to watch Andy Murray on my sofa, so...
And what were the queues like today? Because yesterday, you know, we were reporting that they were horrific. Were they moving?
Yeah, I mean, the stewards were doing a really good job. Obviously, there are always thousands of people there, so I think people should always expect to queue for a number of hours. But they were moving. It was really efficient. Clearly, all of the bad press that they got yesterday has sort of sorted itself out. There were less people there today, obviously, because the weather was due to be bad. But yeah, I mean, as far as I was concerned, it was really, really effective, really smooth.
And had you heeded the warnings not to take your orange pounder paint or cable ties or handcuffs
padlocks.
or glue or padlocks as well? I think that was on the list.
Yeah, I mean, the security was extremely thorough, much more than other years. I did have to sort of empty my entire bag onto a table. But, you know, I suppose that's just the way of it at the moment. And presumably that's what's making it a little bit slower. Although, again, today I think that clearly they've managed to sort it out somewhat.
Well, thanks for bringing us your story, at least. But as you say, you can watch in the comfort of your own home now. Yeah. But rain at Wimbledon.
Thanks,
yeah,
DJ.
not that unusual, but thanks for updating us.
Let's take you back to Westminster, where the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, is continuing to be grilled by senior MPs at the Liaison Committee. He has answered questions so far on inflation. How confident is he on his inflation target, which he did say would be halved by the end of the year? How confident is he about his Rwanda policy? And on Ukraine, he's been questioned by that committee for some 90 minutes. The cost of living, public services also being covered.
And the importance of this is he's not being questioned at PMQs tomorrow. He won't be attending that because of the NHS celebration. So, therefore, the MP's just getting their chance now. But we will update you with all the latest. Patrick is next. Here's the weather for you, if you're going to Wimbledon.
Hello, it's Aidan McGivern here from the Met Office with the GB News forecast. It's turned into a wet afternoon in the south. That rain continuing into the evening in places. Showers elsewhere, but for many of us, it is a drying up theme overnight and indeed over the next few days. It's also going to warm up, but for the time being, it's quite cool out there because we've got this north to northwesterly airflow and we've got this rain spell across the south, some heavy and persistent wet weather moving through southern and then southeastern parts through the evening. The wettest weather by the end of the night into East Midlands, East Anglia, the southeast. Showers elsewhere, and there'll still be some showers across parts of Scotland, northwest England and Wales overnight. A lot of cloud as well, but there'll also be some clear spells as this system moves away. Quite a blustery wind associated with it as well. Very strong winds